Morning, everybody. Welcome to round 850 of the Planning and Regulation Committee. We will commence the meeting at 9:02. Welcome all committee members here today. I've just had a text from Councillor Patterson that she's just a few minutes away and will join us shortly. We welcome our visiting councillors and always a very good morning to our EGM, all of our city officers and to our support staff. Councillors, we will jump straight into it. We have a heavy agenda today, so let's get straight on with it. Attendance and apologies. As mentioned, Councillor Patterson will be with us very shortly. No leave of absence to deal with. Confirmation of the minutes. I just need to make a clarification that changes that were made to the minutes at full council will not be reflected in this yet because this was printed before full council, but support staff have let me know that the updated version will reflect all changes made at council gates. You made a few changes to the minutes at full council for the 849th round. The minutes of the previous meeting.
I
will
see.
Be in this, yeah.
I'm sorry.
So just, you haven't picked up on it, that's fine, but just so it's on the record, any changes made to the minutes of the 849th round at the previous full council will reflect in the future of this one. Is there any questions on that before I seek a mover? In that case, the mover for the minutes of round 849. Councillor Gates, a seconder. Councillor Fowler, all those in favour? Minutes of round 849 are carried. Conflict of interest declarations. I am aware of 3 to be dealt with. And Councillor Martin, we will go to you first.
Thank you, Chair. Just on item 6.2, I have a prescribed conflict of interest, which I have already declared in advance, and it's on the screen at a previous council meeting on 22nd of October. So the prescribed conflict of interest is up there on screen. Just for everyone's to jog everyone's memory, I made a written submission by way of an objection to this development application, MCU/22/88, on the 30th of August 2022, prior to being elected as a councillor in April 2024. And due to the state legislation, I'm deemed to have the prescribed interest, so I won't be taking part in the discussion or the decision, and I'll be needing to leave the room.
I think for the public record, we just make that point again that Councillor Martin has no choice in this matter, that it's very prescribed under the relevant legislation that as a submitter, even though there was well before he considered running for council, that he cannot be part of the decision. So just that's very clear on the public record. So we don't need to take a vote on that one because Councillor Martin will be leaving the room, so he will leave when we get to item 6.2. Councillor Gates, are you ready for your first conflict to be dealt with?
Certainly, Chair. On item 6.3, UPS is the town planning consultant, and I had received from UPS $1,850 in 2014 and $1,850 in 2015. The donations are outside the relevant term, 9 years ago, and I have not discussed the matter with the applicant or consultants and seek to participate in the decision.
Again, just for the public record, so Councillor Gates just confirming you have not discussed this application with the applicant?
Correct.
In that case, I would seek a move or a procedural motion if anyone's interested. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. I can move it saying that Councillor Gates may participate in the decision despite the councillor's conflict of interest, because although Councillor Gates has a declarable conflict of interest, the interest is outside of the relevant term, is minor and of a remote nature, such that a reasonable person would trust that the final decision will be made in the public interest.
We'll just wait for that procedural motion to be displayed on the screen before I seek a seconder. 6.3. Yep.
I bought a cushion, but I'm too embarrassed to bring it down. I bought a cushion.
All day today would be the day technology is going to let us down. That's, yeah.
Excuse me, Chair. It was actually on the drop down. It was just further down if you wanted to go back. If you wanted some help with the wording, I can read that out again if you'd like.
Not the current term, the relevant term.
And Chair, that's just relevant term, not current term.
Councillor Fowler, does that get us to where we need to be?
Yes, thank you.
I have a procedural motion from Councillor Fowler. Do I have a seconder for that procedural motion? Councillor Peter Young. All those in favour? Councillor Hamill, Councillor Young, Councillor Fowler, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Martin, Councillor Doran, Councillor O'Neill. Please record Councillor Gates did not vote. Can we copy that wording for the next one? Councillor Gates, your next conflict?
It's a receipt of donation from the planning consultant for item 6.4, place design, who was a donor in 2011, $1,410, and 2014, $1,850. Again, Chair, it's well outside the relevant term and I'm seeking to be involved in the decision. And again, I confirm I've had no contact with anyone associated with the application.
I'm happy to move the exact same procedural motion as the last one. A seconder? Councillor Fowler had a hand up first. We'll just let it display on the screen. We'll take the vote. All those in favour of the procedural motion. Councillor Hamill, Young, Fowler, Patterson, Martin, Doran, O'Neill. Please record Councillor Gates did not vote. Councillors, that's the only 3 conflict of interest declarations I was aware of. Is there any other conflict declarations to be dealt with at this time? In that case, we'll move on to the starred items. Councillors, I'll kick things off by looking to star item 6.12, the Yatala Enterprise Area Amendment. I'm happy for that to be starred. Do I have any other items that we're looking to add or remove? Councillor Young?
request that items 6.8, 9 and 10 all be unstarred, please.
That's 6.8, 6.9, 6.10. Councillors, any other items? Councillor Martin?
Sorry, Chair, did you say unstar 6.1? If not, I'd like to.
I was 6.12 was the one I did, but 6.1 for Councillor Martin. Anyone else? Councillor Tozer?
I just wanted to speak to 6.4 when we get to it.
If you're happy to speak to it, then we can unstar it and you can move and speak to it. We get a mover and you can speak to it.
Yeah, I just want to be able to talk to it.
Yep, that's fine.
How we do it, yeah. Unstarring the beginning. I don't need a presentation or anything, I've already...
That's cool. We'll do that then. Councillor Doran?
6.5, please, Chair.
And that's for your proposed change recommendation?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Look at you.
Hey.
Yeah, change elections odds, love it. Love to come. I'm champing at the bit to know what's going on here.
Okay, so councillors, to be very, very clear, so that leaves item 6.2 starred.
It will, Chair, it will have to be unstarred or
No, because of course we've dealt with your conflict beforehand. We can leave it starred.
Great.
Yeah. Which you won't be voting. So that leaves 6.2 starred unless another councillor's got an interest in it, which there isn't. So 5.1 remains starred, 6.2 remains starred, 6.6 remains starred, 6.11 remains starred, and 6.12 has a star added. Wilkinson?
Chair, would you mind, although not on this committee, just unstarring 6.11? I'll be very brief on it if it's permitted. If not, like I said, you can keep it started. I can raise it at full council otherwise.
Maybe
Yeah, happy. Your call, Chair. I'm comfortable either way.
Got to be all.
Can you just do it at full council? Yeah. So we will leave 6.11 and then 6.12 as starred. Any concerns, any of that? Going once, going twice? All those in favour of the starred items?
Do you need a mover and a second?
Mover for all the starred items. So mover, Councillor Gates. Seconder, Councillor Fowler. All those in favour? Carried unanimous.
Sorry, Chair.
Should have been pulled out.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's redo this in a different way. So we're going to do everything apart from 6.2, and then we'll do 6.2 separate. So moving at this stage 5.1, 6.6, 6.11, and 6.12. So leaving 6.2 to be dealt with separately. So all those in favour, a mover for the start items, Councillor Gates, a seconder and Councillor Fowler. All those in favour? The start items are carried. Councillor Martin, if you would leave the room for 15 seconds so we can deal with 6.2. Very good. I will move 6.2. A seconder for 6.2.
Described interest.
Do I have a seconder for 6.2? Councillor Gates. All those in favour? 6.2 is carried. Please invite Councillor Martin back in. Okay, councillors, one final thing before we get into items. I was aware of a few general business items to be dealt with today. If you haven't sent them through to chamber support yet, could I ask that you get them through so that when we get to that part of the meeting, we can run through those very quickly. We'll get there. Okay, so let's get into the items proper. Councillors, I'd like to make a procedural move to the agenda and bring 6.7 forward to the start. That just allows Jen to get the presentation out of the way and get on with her day. So if there's no objections to that, I'll move that procedural motion that we amend the agenda and bring 6.7 forward. Very good. All those in favour? That's carried. So we will go to item 6.7.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillors, this morning we have Jennifer Mitchell-Moore from Civic Shifts who's coming to do an updated presentation. So, Jen did provide us with a presentation a few months ago before we kicked off the urban readiness and the staff and external community surveys. It's all right, Jen. We thought it was quite timely for Jen to come today just to update on where we're at in the process, and particularly as it's our last committee for the year, so we don't have a lead into next year.
Over to you, Jen.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
May I just ask a question before we start? I thought the CEO had said last council meeting, the one before, that we would receive documentation on all presentations before they're presented, that that'd be in our documents, and we haven't.
To you, Mr. Chair, I can take that on notice, Councillor Patterson, but we're happy to provide this presentation to you afterwards. We've got the pack.
Good to go. Okay, so today I'm here to provide you an overview of the community change readiness work that we've done to date. We do have the detailed findings of, well, the high-level detailed findings of the community research, and then we're still in the process of analysing the workshops, the GC Have Your Say results as well. So over the past couple of months, I think it has been now, we've been working with the team, the LGMS project team, to implement the Change Readiness Index. That index is a base survey that we went through with some of the councillors in a briefing session where we took you through some of the key thinking behind that survey. The base survey is tailored to reflect the growth and urban change narrative that is emerging within your city. So we worked with the LGMS project team to unpack that emerging growth narrative, incorporating technical analysis and also insights from other community engagement activities that have happened over the past, I think it was 10 years that we drew information from various planning discussions across the city. So that base survey was then tailored into three versions. So we had a community research sample that was a 30-minute online survey with a demographically and geographically representative sample. We then put a slightly shorter version of that survey on GC Have Your Say, and then we've also done that with city staff and councillors. So across the the research program, we had 512 research respondents. GC Have Your Say, we had 2,342 respondents, and we had 212 residents attend community visioning sessions across and special interest group workshops across the program we've just finished 2 weeks ago. And then we also had 151 staff and 8 councillors complete the survey as well. So just quickly, just wanted to position some of the way that this survey was structured and what we were seeking to actually explore. So we were actually looking at a change conversation in the community. The survey wasn't full of very large open-ended questions. It actually did have some open-ended, but it also presented a lot of the thinking and work in progress that the team are actually thinking about around growth and change at the moment. And what we're looking to do is actually structure an understanding of where the community's awareness and understanding is generally of growth, some of the kind of ownership of the need for things like urban consolidation, some increased density, housing diversity and climate responsive planning, knowledge of some of the strategies and how we might start addressing some of the challenges, but also realising the benefits of growth. And in the survey structure we did, we were quite specific in trying to unpack the various elements of that so we could understand where the community was at in the change journey and how we could actually then scaffold that moving forward from here. So from the research respondents, we had 512 respondents. We had recruited them to reflect the planning geographies that were emerging within the LGMS project, which included the city frame, city spine south, city spine north, city spine central, and also the coastal corridor, which we did actually divide into 3 geographic areas because of a number of feedback from various councillors, just making sure that we did have a representative sample from across the coastal corridor in north, central and south. We got a great age distribution. As you can see there, the age distribution though is weighted more heavily towards younger people generally, because we know that in public survey context, that's voices we often don't hear. And when we did look at the GC data, we had just very, looking at that now, we had a large proportion of respondents who are over 70 and also between 60 and 69. So we had a very high representation of that age bracket in the GC Have Your Say data. And in our sample, we actually did make sure we actually heard from the younger audience groups as well. So one of the first parts of our growth awareness and change discussion is actually, are people aware of the extent of growth that's coming? So as you can see on this results here, this is the community research results only. As you can see, there is moderate awareness of growth, but not the size and scale of growth that actually is projected here for the Gold Coast. Now that's really important, because to understand the scale of change that is coming is really critical in the change journey. So part of the kind of awareness of growth across SEQ, but also in Gold Coast, was not as strong as you would need it to be really in the kind of change context you're having. I have quickly been able to pull the GC data on this instance, and even the self-motivated, highly passionate group of individuals that are very active on GC Have Your Say, there was only about 50% of growth awareness in SEQ and Gold Coast as well. So even within the highly motivated and passionate group of people, the awareness of the scale and size of change coming, we would want it to be a bit stronger than that to make sure we are all kind of starting from what the size and scale of the challenge and opportunity is. The next thing we actually talked about were the perceived challenges of growth and change in the region. So the top 3 challenges are what you can see on the screen right now. So the potential strain on infrastructure and the particularly public transport was a really large conversation around the challenges. The overall impact on lifestyle affordability and cost of living was viewed as a potential challenge, so that when we grow and change, the cost of things may increase, and that's going to affect me, and that the growth and change may reduce the green amenity of the area. What is really interesting to us is what's not on this list. We have a number of other cities we've done similar lists and challenges in, and normally we have a lot of challenges that are raised about housing diversity and providing housing choice and housing affordability, and the housing options weren't selected as often as you would have imagined in other surveys where we've implemented this same list before. So it was really interesting to not see the housing challenges emerge as strongly as you would have thought, particularly in this context. What was really interesting is that in the Junior Youth Council workshop we ran, they didn't pick housing challenges either. And again, often with young people, that's one of the biggest challenges they select. And when we sort of probed in that a little bit further with the Young Junior Youth Council, they actually said to us that they hadn't selected the housing challenges because they thought it was so far outside their ability to influence or impact that they didn't select it. So this kind of feeling of being able to influence or impact the housing affordability discussion was something the young people just felt it just wasn't even something they selected because they just didn't think they could influence or change that. From a convergent benefits point of view of growth, there was a lot of recognition that increased population growth in the right locations can actually have better use of infrastructure, and then also support new infrastructure to go where it needs to go and focus where we are actually investing in that. It can make the coast more vibrant and interesting place to live, so they kind of associated increased population with more services, cultural activities, events and things to do in the city. And that it supports your economy. So having growth does support the economy, makes it better, more interesting place for business and improves access to jobs. Again, interestingly, we would normally expect some of the benefits to emerge here around housing choice, offering different housing across the life stage, which just didn't come up as strongly as what we've seen in other LGAs either. So there was a number of other questions we asked them, but for anyone who's completed the survey themselves, you would understand there was a whole section in there which really explained the overall approach to growth at the moment, and then some of the key scenarios for urban change that were starting to emerge as potential scenarios or way urban change could be accommodated on the Gold Coast. So from an overarching growth management approach, we spoke to the community about some 3 core foundational elements of that approach, one being maintaining the established urban boundaries, so not developing or adding any new areas to the urban boundary, focusing all new development in well-established existing neighbourhoods, and particularly around the inland and established centres, so thinking about the centres and growth around the inland centres, and also including massive improvements in public transport, including light rail infrastructure and new high-frequency bus services connecting east to west. So as an overarching approach to growth, they were the foundations we presented in the scenario, and we built those up with the project team. And then we had 5 scenarios there that range from enhancing coastal city centres through to more homes in established neighbourhoods. And the other scenarios also included growing the southern coastal corridors in a way that respects the unique look, feel, experience and geography of that location, supporting inland urban centres, more homes around high-frequency public transport and creating station precincts was scenario 4. And then scenario 5 was more homes in established neighbourhoods. So that's things like secondary dwellings, granny flats, subdivision of larger blocks into smaller blocks across the city. So this is the community research results. So I just want to make sure I focus on that. The community research results, we are still analysing the Gold Coast Have Your Say results and overlaying those 2 views. But from our community research results, they found the overall approach to growth that we just went through before is sensible but challenging. And it's interesting to note that quite a large proportion of people viewed this as desirable or comfortable compared to the other end of unthinkable or challenging. So as an overall approach to growth, the community research sample were endorsed and felt comfortable with that position, although it does actually come with challenges. Some of the reasons that we gave them a qualitative response at the end of this question, and they could tell us some of the reasons why they felt the way they did about this approach. And overall, many people said that this approach protects the environment and the natural assets that the city has, which was really important, provides more choice of places to live, and particularly providing other options for development or change that aren't just on the coastal corridor. So actually bringing options in through the city was actually a really important part of the appeal of this strategy, that it would increase access to jobs and make some of the inland centres much more viable, interesting, and actually live, work, experience, cultural, all of those things. So actually having these stronger inland centres, they found that quite appealing. They thought this strategy actually takes pressure off the coastal corridor, so not making everything have to be in the coastal corridor, and that this was the best approach to have efficient use of infrastructure. So what we then asked is, as we said, we presented all the various 5 scenarios, and this is the responses for these scenarios being applied across the city. We're in the phase of doing a detailed analysis by the planning geographies and how people feel in each of the planning geographies for these scenarios. But overall, you can see that the scenarios were generally viewed quite positively. Between 50 and 58% of respondents viewed them as comfortable or desirable. So when we looked at the community research sample, I'm just going to put that in context, that generally they were very comfortable with this approach and scenarios from a research point of view. Some of the reasons, we asked them the rationale for these scenarios and how they felt about them and what would have to be in place to actually make these successful. And we're starting to kind of create our working list of critical success factors of these scenarios working in locations. One of the main critical success factors overall is increased public transport and connectivity. It's just an absolute top of mind discussion for the community, and actually having effective movement around the city, which includes public and active transport, and having a network was a really critical success factor for all these scenarios working. The concept of environmental protection and urban naturalisation, so making sure we protect the natural environments, promote climate responsive design and urban outcomes, and that we also protect wildlife and ecosystems and bring nature into the urban environment as much as possible. That we made sure when these scenarios were implemented, they did provide housing diversity. So where we did actually do strategies, for instance, like the inland centres, that it wasn't all just high-rise apartments, that there was other options as well within that centre context. So there was a diverse housing types available. Critical to this was the concept of creating really great centres. So these centres have built form, so development or new buildings, but equally the community talked about the absolute critical importance of all the other amenities and everything that's in between those buildings that actually make those centres work. So things like parks, particularly community facilities was a big thing that people raised, sporting infrastructure, all the things that actually would make a great, vibrant centre beyond the private sector development investment, and actually what were all those elements and how did they come together to create really strong centres was a really important part of the community's views on making these scenarios work in their locations. The other kind of element to all of this was protecting the look, feel and experience of the Gold Coast today. There's a lot of discussion around the Gold Coast being laid back, outdoor lifestyle, this coastal environmental and urban design to get breezes, sightlines, outdoor lifestyle and all those kind of attributes was also one of the key parts that people were looking for. And the kind of final comment, which was across all these scenarios, was that there needed to be a high level of trust between developers, community and the local government, that these outcomes would be driven to be community focused and actually be looking at the private sector investment and making sure that's high quality outcomes, but also the public realm and other things that actually come together. And the trust that actually between those three parties, you'll be able to find solutions that actually work for everyone down to that next detailed level of design. So in principle, there was support for these ideas, but then how they were executed at that very local level, so that local area planning discussion did come up on some of these scenarios, but actually making sure they work at the ground level in that sense was quite important. Cool. So from here, sorry, I won't talk to this slide, but just in terms of our final element, we are looking now at the GC Have Your Say data for those scenarios. We're also looking at them by coastal and by planning geography. So all of those various areas we have, we actually are starting to look at how people feel in those areas by location. We think it would be a really great idea to actually be able to work with councillors in a more detailed way around each of those planning geography conversations. So whether that's through a workshop or however those sorts of things run here, but actually having a real detailed discussion on what this might mean for your particular division and areas and how we actually can start working those through would be a really great way to actually start incorporating this information and these priorities within the LGMS. So how do we actually respond to these in the LGMS, but also there may be other council programs, priorities, policies where some of these things will actually need to be addressed as well. So to finish, in the community visioning workshops, which we haven't quite finished analysing all the information yet, but at the very end, for anyone that went to any of those sessions, we did finish by asking the community to write a CTA or a call to action that they wanted to be able to take back to council to actually say how they'd like to see growth happen in the City of Gold Coast. And I just want to read a few of those out to kind of finish the presentation because I think they start painting a real strong picture of the things that community are looking for. So one thing was one participant, be principal-led, not development-led city. So yeah, be a principal-led city, not a developer-led city. Let us have a home, one unit, duplex, townhouse, granny flat at a time. We need more images of what diverse density can mean for us and what's suitable in our local communities. Local area plans for growth areas with criteria for environmental performance. More social and affordable housing to ensure a wide variety of people can live, work and enjoy our city. Achieve growth through environmentally conscious, community-friendly and lifestyle-driven design and planning. And the final one, which was keep public consultation to keep improving our city. So they're just a selection of some of the things that people said as call to actions at the end. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Councillors, questions for Jen on the work so far in LGMS? Councillor Young and then Councillor Tozer.
Thanks. Thanks, Jen. Through you, Chair. What's an example of an inland urban centre, please? Would that be Mudgeeraba, Nerang?
Easy.
Through the chair, Helensvale, Coomera, I'm going down in order, sort of in order. Coomera, Helensvale, Robina, Nerang. I think that's it. Yep.
Thank you.
They're the major inland centres, and then the other kind of idea was the centres along the public transport corridors, little smaller centres, but they're the major inland centres.
Councillor Tozer.
Councillor Doran and I were just commenting and lamenting that announcing today that there's a councillor workshop on the 27th of November might not be the best way forward, given the sheer volume of school events we have to be at. So I very much love to participate in some sort of councillor workshop. That day's already got 4 appointments in, and I'm so sorry, but yeah.
EGM.
Through Mr Chair, I was just going to say, Councillor Tozer, we wanted to just raise that with committee today. So we had spoken to Councillor Hamill, absolutely mindful of the commitments that you've all got at the moment. We do feel as a team it would be really valuable to have that workshop, but we're happy to be flexible too. Also taking into account that our last council's on the 3rd of December and just need to work out the timing of that.
Yeah, I'm good for the week of the 16th of December. I could do that week. But yeah, it's pretty hectic until then. But.
So we might take that as an action from today, Alicia, that we possibly float 2 or 3 dates and times out to everyone's offices and try and get a consensus on. I doubt we're going to get one. We might have to do it over 2.
I haven't got time that morning, but
yeah. Okay.
But there is a need to keep things moving, and ideally getting a workshop done before Christmas so that the team can keep rolling on with stuff.
Yeah.
Is needed. Yeah,
we could do it at 6:30 a.m.
Yeah.
We'll do a breakfast session.
Councillors, we'll send a few date options. What we'll try and do is get the most attendees, but then liaise with everyone. If you absolutely want to be at it too, just please let us know, but we'll get an email out this afternoon or tomorrow.
Yeah. Other questions for Jen? Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. On one of the earlier slides, it had a breakdown of the feedback, and there was an unthinkable flashing red line and then challenging. Can you speak to any of the feedback received from the folks who were in the unthinkable space in relation to the future growth of the city?
What they were thinking.
Yeah, what they were thinking.
Through the chair, some of the unthinkable was a general view that growth should not be happening and growth numbers should be capped, which is a federal government discussion. So some of the unthinkable narrative that's through the whole survey, particularly the unthinkable audiences, is around their views that growth should not be happening at all and that should be stopped. So don't let people come across the state and things like that is quite a strong narrative in some of the unthinkable ones generally, which is not a local government challenge or issue. So part of the conversation there is how encouraging community to raise that federally if that's the conversation they want. So that's one really significant part of the unthinkable. The other parts of the unthinkable were twofold, density and height, but what that meant in terms of the ground plane community experience was quite important. So yes, high, but what does that mean is happening at the ground plane that me as a resident is experiencing? It was really important. And where that hasn't been done well, people were referring to some of those outcomes and saying that type of outcome brings density and then the services don't come and our area gets overwhelmed. We have not great street outcomes and we don't have access to facilities, services, etc. We think we need to actually accommodate additional people, and that was mainly the unthinkable. The other component was that there was a level of trust, really lack of trust between the types of outcomes a developer would do and what community would feel comfortable with, and there was some conversations around the 50% uplift bonus and that the community benefits that framework is based on, some community didn't feel that was benefits to them. So there was a lot of discussion around when extra height's given, what does that mean for us and where have those benefits come from, and is there a way that I can be part of saying what those benefits should be. So a lot of the unthinkable really was more in that kind of overarching, didn't agree with growth generally, the urban outcomes that were happening in higher density areas particularly, they weren't thinking they were great ground plane outcomes particularly, and that infrastructure and services weren't keeping up with it, and where developers were given additional height, that it wasn't from what a community perceived as benefits to them. that should get that uplift.
Follow up.
In relation to that, probably putting you on the spot, so I'm happy to take it on those if there can be a data breakdown. But from my very quick calculation, there was 20% or 1 in 5 respondents in the red, shall we say. Yep. Do you know a geographical breakdown of those respondents and whether or not that can be shared?
We do have it by geography. Well, we're starting to get it by geography, so that's part of the more detailed discussion that we could actually, in time, be able to sit down and take you through those differences by geography as we're pulling those together. So we do have them, and we are in the process of analysing what they look like. I suppose one part that is really important to think about in these sorry, through the chair, in these scenarios is that we're not necessarily asking do you support or not support, because sometimes when we're navigating growth, that might actually be solutions we have to actually work through. So part of the unthinkable to desirable is also just understanding what those challenges and issues are from the unthinkable and challenging cohort, and understanding the types of things that we could do to start supporting them through that discussion.
Councillor Tozer, then Councillor Fowler, and then Councillor Martin.
So I'm fascinated about how this unthinkable, so at the moment, 1 in 12 people in scenario 5 think it's unthinkable that there's more homes in established suburbs. And one of the reasons you gave for that was that there's just a percentage or a proportion of the population who think we should have net zero migration. They think people shouldn't, shouldn't be any more people in the city, and we should cap population. Mm-hmm. How does our unthinkable category compare to broader studies of the Australian population when it comes to people who think about net zero migration and population capping?
Through the chair, these scenario outcomes are actually quite positive, I believe, because we also look at the other bookend. So the fact that you have almost 50% in all those scenarios that are in comfortable and desirable is actually quite a strong outcome. So I think there's also, if we focus on both ends, it's actually quite important as well. From a general theme that has come out in a lot of our work is around growth and capping growth discussions. Yes. But we are very strong in saying that is not a local government discussion. Your role as a local government is to plan for the growth that the state has told you have to be considering. And as a community conversation, that's a really important understanding of how to talk about that, because that is not something within local government's control. And it is something that comes out in a lot of other LGAs we've done the same process in.
And my question was, do we reference this against some other broader data? Do we, or do we kind of just take a look at it and leave it? Through
the chair, the scenarios are unique in every LGA we do it in. So for instance, we've never had a coastal corridor or a southern coastal corridor scenario. We've had ones in more homes in established suburbs, so I could probably look at some of those comparisons. But in general, what we look at is the overall views to the scenarios that are emerging in that location, to that context, and then we start looking at proportions. That. So we can put some in, but it's not comparable to your scenarios.
So if I recall correctly, you did this work, obviously we've worked together on other things before, but you did maybe some work in Cairns?
Yeah, so through the chair, we've done this in 11 LGAs now across Australia.
So how does our comfortable, desirable sectors compare to some of those other LGAs, maybe those other LGAs in Queensland, and how does our unthinkable compare to those other LGAs in Queensland?
So, guys, I do apologise only because of time. Can we take that one on notice? It's a really interesting question, but Jen shouldn't be able to answer it today off the cuff, I'm guessing.
Through the chair, I can quickly. It's strong. Your comfortable and desirable is actually quite strong. Your unthinkable's relatively big. What's smaller is your sensible but challenging, proportionally. So I would normally see more in the mid-sensible but challenging range. Right. So actually from this particular data set, again, this is the community research data set only. We're also looking at the GC Have Your Say data, so just putting that in context. But overall, it actually is quite strong in either end. And then that central section of sensible but challenging, slightly smaller.
Thank you. That are all my questions. Sorry, boss.
Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick. Just with the LGMS, we're heading to the end of that and we'll be submitting the paper. How does the community engagement scope of work look next year? Does it continue, or do we move to the next phase? Like, is it still engagement with the community over the next year, or does it die down and then scale back up as we go through the process?
Through the chair, I might take that one. The plan is to have strong community engagement for the length of the program. In early next year, we are aiming to have the document out for community consult, so there'll be lots of consultation during that stage, and it all will build on each other. So pending the outcomes of that, then we'll plan the next phase.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Just on this slide, just interested, we obviously talked about the unthinkable, and thanks for the explanation there. Just interested on the other end, at the desirable. Were there any surprises there? Obviously, seeing the disparity of the desirables is interesting. Particularly the Southern Corridor is lowest. Just wondering if you can provide any colour on that desirable end?
Yep. I think I was pleasantly surprised by the more homes in established suburbs, because that outcome, when we've through the chair, sorry, when we've talked about those kinds of scenarios before in other cities, often they're really challenging for communities because they're actually the smaller local neighbourhood level street that hasn't changed a lot in 30 years. The change has been everywhere else. So often that scenario has less desirable or comfortable than that. So I was quite surprised by that outcome, which I think is really actually a fascinating scenario and a growth option at Gold Coast, because it does allow that kind of infill. The other element, the more homes around frequent public transport, some of the ideas that they selected in the community workshop, but also some of the commentary, this concept of station precincts along high-frequency bus or light rail transport really resonated, and I think that's a really strong outcome from that perspective as well. So this concept of creating great precincts around stations is a scenario that really was strong. The growing Southern Coastal Corridor, I think there's a lot of conversation in that area generally, but I think that's actually quite a strong result for that scenario, because we actually did name height specifications, certain kind of considerations around light rail, etc. So from my perspective, that's quite a strong outcome in that one as well.
On that one. Just on scenario 5, we talk about more homes in established suburbs. I'm just wondering how far-reaching established is. You know, I find that one difficult. I can understand West and Coastal Corridor, but established. Could you define that for us?
Yeah, I am. Through the chair, I'm going to look to Emma here when I start saying the suburbs just quickly. So really, it's any of, like, Eleonora was one of the ones in there. If you think about some of your more established local suburbs that have been there for 30 to 40 years maybe, where they're not around a centre but they are within some proximity, have good amenities within them, that type of change could happen there. This scenario wasn't considered in the city frame, more the rural hinterland areas. That wasn't considered for those areas, but everywhere else in the city that's not a centre, this scenario was provided to.
Councillor Gates.
Just on that, so was it primarily low density areas?
Through the chair, yes.
Thank you.
And the scenario specifically spoke to doing things like subdividing housing blocks, large blocks into 2. It was about secondary dwellings. It was about allowing up to townhouses and up to 3-storey townhouses across those areas generally as well. So that was how that scenario was described.
Good prompt, Councillor Gates. Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned a couple of minutes ago about the acceptance for density around travel nodes and station stops. Did you, was it only existing currently built stations, or did you forecast what could potentially come? And I suppose the question follow up to that is, well, how can you get, how can you forecast if you did, because they don't exist, we've got no commitment to some.
Through the chair, scenario 4 specifically talked about more homes around high-frequency public transport corridors when they are established. So we actually specifically mentioned east-west bus corridors. We didn't name locations, but we did suggest a network of east-west bus high-frequency bus networks across the city, and that on those corridors, you around stations have higher density in those areas. That was scenario 4, so it wasn't unestablished. That was actually proposed or potential new.
So just a quick follow-up, Chair, on the east-west example, I haven't seen any detail, to be perfectly honest. So I'm curious as to what detail the folks survey were given so they can make that informed judgment.
Through the chair, I believe all councillors were provided a copy of the survey. So if you look within the scenario descriptions, there's illustrations and very clear short paragraphs.
But was there discussion points if it was raised or if there's any questions? No.
Sorry.
There's no further material aside from the graphics in the survey.
Graphics with the description underneath. That was it, because that's all the detail that we have. Because it's positioning our current thinking and thinking about growth as concepts, not geographically located always. Sometimes it is geographically located, but not always.
The councillors will wrap questions up there for Jen. We'll take the action item away to get that email out this afternoon with proposed dates on councillor workshops. Just acknowledging that to keep our work program moving along, where ideally we'll try and get that workshop done before Christmas. Is there a... Yep, so we'll just note the presentation. So I'm happy to move that. A seconder to note the presentation. Councillor Gates, all those in favour? That is carried. Jen, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Councillors, we'll go back to our normal program order, which takes us to item 6.1. Monique, welcome. Good morning, officers. Councillors, an interest in a presentation on this one, or are we looking to go straight to questions?
I'm interested in the presentation, Chair.
Very good. So I'm told it's been a few years since Monique has presented to committee, so as always, we will be gentle with officers who haven't presented for a little while. Councillors?
Thank you. Through the chair. Item 6.1 is an other change application to the development permit for an MCU for multiple dwellings for 35 dwellings at 949, 951 and 953 Gold Coast Highway, Palm Beach. The other change involves an increase in the building height from 29 metres to 33.86 metres, which is a difference of 4.86 metres. It represents a 16.75% increase in building height. The change to the building height is due to the provision of a roof structure over the private rooftop terrace areas and the provision of lift access to the rooftop. The change triggers impact assessment due to the height exceeding the 29-metre code assessable height, and the change also changes the apartment from medium rise to high rise. The site is located on the eastern side of the Gold Coast Highway and has frontage to the Gold Coast Highway Service Road. The service road is only accessible from the Palm Beach Parklands car park. Construction of the code-approved apartment building is currently occurring on the site. Immediately north and east of the site is the Currumbin Sands Holiday Apartment, which consists of multiple dwelling and short-term accommodation units within 3 to 4 stories of building height. Further north are the high-rise towers, Royal Palm, which is 26 stories, and Princess Palm, which is 18 stories. The site also adjoins the Alia building to the south, which is a 9-story apartment building. This building consists of 10 two-bedroom units orientated to the south and the east. Further east of the site is the beach and the Palm Beach Parklands. So these next slides show a comparison between the code-approved development on the left and the proposed other change on the right. This is the southwest view that is from the streetscape. The 29-metre code accessible height is noted in red on these slides. Then we move around to the northwest view, which is an elevation to the Currumbin Sands development. This is the northeast view, the other elevation to Currumbin Sands. Now we move to the southeast view, which is the elevation to the adjoining Aaliyah building. This slide shows the approved roof terrace on the left and the proposed changes to the roof terrace on the right. This site was subject to a previous development application and an appeal, the Darjeeling Investments appeal, where the court set aside council's decision to approve a high-rise apartment building and refused the development application. This is a side-by-side comparison of the other change on the left and that refused development on the right. This comparison shows the ultimate development is quite different to the refused development in terms of height, scale and impacts. These have been put together by the applicant's architect and have been scaled correctly. So the key consideration for the other change application is building height. An assessment has been undertaken against the requirements of section 33219 of the strategic framework, and the development has been found to comply. The applicant provides an artist's impression comparison of the current approval and the proposed other change within the context of the immediate area, and this shows the built form, local identity and sense of place. These perspectives show the other change is closer to the medium-rise building height and is consistent with local character, given, number one, from a quantitative perspective, the building is only 1.86 metres higher than the medium-rise definition. And number two, from a qualitative perspective, the building is 4.86 metres above the 29-metre building height. And that is the current approved height of the development. The proposed addition is potentially not highly perceivable due to the centrally located roof terraces, and consequently, the proposed building could be perceived as a medium-rise building rather than a high-rise building. The applicant also provides perspectives of the proposed other change within the context of the immediate area. It is considered that the information provided demonstrates a well-managed interface with, relationship to, and impact on nearby development. The adjoining Aaliyah building, as you can see, is constructed in a way that turns its back to the subject site and is designed to direct primary views away from the subject site towards the public open space. The proposed rooftop terrace of the other change is considered to be sufficiently set back and screened from the existing rooftop pool area of the Aaliyah building by way of landscaping and balustrading. The proposed development retains the approved built form detailing at the interface areas to the Currumbin Sands building. The inclusion of curved balcony edges and recesses is considered to soften the impact of the tower edges and provides a recessive interface to the Currumbin Sands buildings. The proposed rooftop addition is centralised and considered to not be highly visible from the neighbouring properties. The elevations are modulated with deep recesses to appear as four vertical forms. In response to the public notification of the other change application, 17 properly made submissions were received, and the matters raised are detailed in the officer's report and included in this slide. If we move to the submitters map, we can see where those submitters are located, and on closer view, some of these submitters reside in the Currumbin Sands holiday apartments and the Aaliyah apartment. So in response to these submissions and officer comments, the applicant provided amended drawings demonstrating changes to the rooftop terraces. And they include a reduction of the height of the balustrades from 1.8 metres to 1.05 metres. The pools have been set back from the eastern property boundary and their shapes slightly reconfigured. The lift lobbies, stairs, laundries and bathrooms have also been slightly reconfigured, and the non-trafficable areas of the rooftop have now been identified. The larger containerised landscape planters have been extended, and that's an increase of planting from 47 square metres to 61 square metres. The changes, it's considered, will assist to mitigate the submitter's concerns. So the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Monique. We'll go to questions. Questions, Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Just got a couple of questions. Obviously, this one was subject to a court ruling, so I just want to clarify that in the context of the new application. So in relation to the former development, and sorry, I should just clarify, so the former application was approved by council, but it was the appellants that took it to planning court, and that was upheld, so the council decision was reversed for refusal. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So just looking at the decision of the judge's orders, especially around item C being a varied, ordered and interesting skyline, the district court judge said that the former DA, I quote, would represent an intrusion of a third inconsistent and incongruous element to the local skyline, and so would neither provide nor contribute towards an ordered skyline, and the criterion was not met. So I understand this proposal, it's 10 metres lower, or it's only than the original application, but the proposal still does interrupt that skyline, as it would be taller than both the neighbours, the 9-storey building to the south and the 3- and 4-storey buildings that wrap around to the north and the east. So the judge talked about the higher order palm buildings being aberrations or anomalies. So I suppose my question is, given the judge made that issue around the sky, that made that point about the skyline, how does this proposal, given it is interrupting that skyline again, now met?
Well, I might start by just briefly describing the differences between the refused development and the proposed development. So the essential differences between the two are, number one, there was a significant difference in building height. The refused design provided for 14 stories and 43.5 metres compared to the proposed design of 10 stories and 33.86 metres. There was also a difference in design. The refused design provided 3 bulky connected tower forms on a podium with at-grade parking, compared to the proposed design of 4 narrower connected tower forms within a tower-to-ground arrangement. And lastly, there's also a difference in the landscape outcome and deep planning outcomes between the two, especially to the street edge, to the adjoining boundaries and the upper levels. Obviously, the Darjeeling decision came first, and then the code development was approved, and now we have the other change. The Darjeeling decision does not talk at all to the current development application, and they are different.
Just follow on. Thank you, Chair. So understand those things were improved, and understand about the code application. But I guess my conundrum here is that the judge talked about the interrupting of the skyline, and even though this is lower, this still does interrupt the skyline. The judge didn't say that in context of, he didn't say interrupts it by a certain amount. He just talked about how that there's an intrusion of a third inconsistent, incongruous element in the local skyline, and we still have that again. So I can't see how we are, in light of the other changes. I'm concerned that it flies in the face of the decision by the judge. I don't know if you can add any more context on that intrusion component.
No, yeah. Could it, maybe it needs a bit of. Would I be correct that the judge in making those comments was looking at the Darjan building as proposed at the time, which was 43.5 metres? So it's difficult, I'm guessing, to compare it in that way. But Roger, did you want to make some context to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the location of Royal Palm and Princess Palm are critical for this, but also the Alea building next door. So, in our opinion, Judge Rackerman took a lot of emphasis on the heights of Royal Palm and Princess Palm, and that they were considered to be incongruent to the local character. This development and Monique's comparison is actually really, really useful. And in my opinion, they are, as Monique said, different developments, and every application is an evaluative process. And that red line on the proposed development, you can clearly see what's above that red line is very lightweight and very inconsequential. So just for your information, what is below that red line is the same as the Alea building. It's the same height. So if we're being technical, the level of incongruence is what's above that red line. And in an officer's opinion, it's recessed, it's lightweight, it's in our opinion, inconsequential, particularly when taken from the ground level and various vistas. Everything's got to have a context, and through planning, everything has to have an impact. That's how we assess applications. So Monique, Adam and I consider that what's above that red line is inconsequential, won't have an adverse amenity impact on any external properties, and it's congruent with what's at Alea next door. A completely different context to the Darjeeling appeal.
Follow-up, Councillor Martin? Or another question?
Just thanks through your chair to Roger. I understand, I appreciate what you're saying around the amount above the red line. The way I read.
So I'm going to take a question here because that question's been asked and answered. Officers have recommended it at this height. So if you do have another question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the reinforcement of local identity and sense of place. So it does also link back to that former court decision where the judge concluded that, quotes here, there's a primarily low to medium rise built form spine along the Gold Coast Highway coastal strip. And he went on to say that the existing and emerging built form, insofar as it is relevant to the context of the subject site, is best described as generally low to medium rise. So I understand at 10 stories or 33.8 metres, this is technically a high rise, and note your point about it could be perceived as medium rise, but it is not. So I'm concerned how this now reflects that local identity, given the judge has said the current and the emerging is low to medium rise.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I can only reinforce what Monique and Roger have already said, but when you look at the image there, the amount of building above that medium rise is inconsequential in terms of how we would assess it and perceive it, and probably how the general public would perceive it when standing on the street. So technically it does get into the high rise, but I don't think this proposal, again, in reading words in the Dajan judgment, it's got to be sort of considered in context. So the court viewed the proposal on the right as being, non-compliant with the framework, but I think this proposal on the left is, it's just the lift overruns, and it's the rooftop areas that's been added to an already approved development that needs to be sort of weighed up as well. So it comes back to what's the actual impact of that additional rooftop area.
Thank you. Just last question here, Chair. So just in relation to scale, the built form, I noticed in the report it's acknowledged it's a larger floor plate. I think it's over 800. Just given that's over the AO, and it talks about the performance outcome would be a slender looking building, but I guess I certainly perceive it as quite squat and bulky. Just interested in how that meets the slender bulky form if it doesn't meet the AO for floor plate.
Through the chair, what that is referring to is the 4 slender tower forms that are perceived on the elevations, this particular elevation. So that is has come about from the refused development showing 3, and the architects have accepted that 4 actually reduces the perceived building bulk in that regard. So yes, while the criteria talks to the size in terms of square metres, there are architectural elements put forward which reduce that perceived building bulk.
Councillor Gates.
I'm happy to move the item when you're ready, Chairman.
I am happy to accept that. I did have a couple of questions myself. I was just looking at the key matters raised by submitters because I want to pick up on Mick's points about impact. So looking to impact concerns raised during submitters, one of the things raised was increased shade. Do you happen to have the shadow diagrams in your presentation?
Yes.
Yep, if we could go to those.
These are those. Yep.
So am I correct that the amount of increased shading from this is the little sections of lime green added to the red?
That's correct, yes.
Yep. So it'd be a fair assessment to say that the impacts of shade, of very additional shade, are actually non-existent because the additional shade is only onto a roadway?
Correct, yes.
Yep. I was interested as well, so one of the issues raised by submitters and impact was a concern around increased wind, and I didn't really understand what that concern was. Are you able to provide any context from what was in the submissions about what the concern of increased wind by these additional roof structures was?
Through the chair, a number of submitters raised amenity concerns. One of those specifically mentioned wind, increased wind. There wasn't, as I recall, a description of why that was raised, but nonetheless, we have included a condition in the officer's recommendation on the recommendation of the assessing architect to provide a wind impact assessment report as part of their development approval.
That'd be interesting to see, because I was struggling to understand how, if you live in the building next door, that these additional structures on top of this roof are going to increase the wind impact on you. Could you talk me through the concern around increased overlooking? And I know there's been some conditions applied in terms of around the edges and setbacks and whatnot, but could you talk to what I think is a very real impact concern about increased overlooking, or privacy concerns is probably the other way to put it?
Through the chair, there were issues raised with the submitters about, yes, increased overlooking to the Currumbin Sands building and the adjoining Aaliyah buildings as well. In response to those submissions in particular, the applicant provided amended drawings which reduced the height of the balustrading at the rooftop level from 1.8 to 1.05. I do have a comparison showing the differences, which may be useful. So here, so the perspective, sorry, that's the wrong one. This one. So what we see here on the left is the superseded northeast elevation. So that is the elevation that was submitted initially as part of the other change application. Then on the right is the proposed amended northeast elevation, which was submitted following receipt of the submissions. So we can see the reduction in balustrade height, which goes away to, I suppose, reducing the perceived visual impact of the changes at that elevation. And this as well, so the northwest elevation, we can see the difference in height to the balustrading.
So the final question I had in terms of impact of this proposal was concerns raised around noise. Would you provide some specifics around any conditions or changes made in terms of acoustic treatments and in terms of operating hours applied to this development?
Through the chair, the applicant did submit an updated acoustic assessment, which is referenced in the revised conditions. Essentially, it refers to the revised drawings and really maintains the noise mitigation requirements that have currently been approved. So in terms of hours of operation and the like, the height of acoustic fences and things like that, that has not changed, no.
Councillors, any other questions before I go to Councillor Gates? Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick one. Well, just on the balustrade, while I understand that the visual amenity is improved with it lower, what about from a safety perspective? Because 1.05, what's the compliant height?
Through the chair, the architects have advised it's compliant with the requirements, which I believe is 1 metre, 1 metre high. Yeah.
Thank you.
Through the chair, through the building code, National Construction Code, it is a metre. It's of safety is a concern for the private certifier through the development permit for building works, but they are showing compliance through these plans as well.
Councillor Gates, still happy to move the item?
Yeah, sure, Chair.
I'm happy to second it. Would you like to open?
Yeah, sure. I recognise that it's of concern to the councillors dealing with these issues when these other change applications are submitted. It's annoying, but we're stuck with it. In this instance, I think that there were limited submissions. The applicant has made changes to the setbacks and reconfigured the spaces so that neighbouring properties are not so impacted. They've increased the planting and it's a more attractive design without doubt. So in the instance that the applicant has been responsive to community feedback through the advertised process, I think that we can be satisfied, and it is only a minor change that has occurred. So all things considered, I don't see how we could possibly refuse the slight impact that has been suggested by the rooftop features.
Speaker against. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I won't be supporting today's recommendation for approval, and I'm aware that I wouldn't have the support for a refusal. However, while the change is relatively minor, I'm concerned that the height reduction, that there's still elements of the change application have not been resolved in light of the previous judgment in the Planning Environment Court. I totally recognise that we are typically we're talking about impacts. What is the impact to the residents of the additional change? But I think there's extenuating circumstances here where we have a judgment that actually outlines the issues. I don't think they're all resolved, particularly around the skyline intrusion and the local identity and sense of place. It's probably, perhaps if this had come as the original approval, for me, it wouldn't be so tainted, I suppose, with the issues around the residents. I mean, the residents who live nearby had to foot the bill to take the previous application to court, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I totally recognise this is not councils, this is the State Planning Act. A developer can bring another change, but those neighbours are still concerned about those impacts not totally being resolved, and I share those concerns with them. I don't know whether they are practically able to fight this or whether that would be the same outcome. I certainly wouldn't want to be on the side of going to a planning court twice and having a refusal, so I won't be supporting it in light of the experience the local residents have had with the development.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. I will speak for quickly.
Excuse me, Chair, you can close debate if there's no one else wanting to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Gates. In that case, I'll take the deferral to close. So happy to support and happy to close on this item today. While I acknowledge Councillor Martin's point about the former application and the court outcome, this is a completely new application. This is a code-approved building that is seeking a couple metres on top of open communal space structures. So I am going to focus on what the impacts are, because that is what we need to focus on. So for me, for what is proposed, the main impacts can only be visual amenity. I think there's been a lot of effort put into the fact that the way this is set back, that from most viewpoints, these additional structures will not be visible. So I don't see a major impact with that. Shadowing, as we saw on the shadow diagrams, this does not create any additional shadow impact on any resident. It adds additional shadow onto a roadway. Wind, I'm still not sure what submitters were raising in that regard, but I'm confident that the additional condition opposed by officers for some further work on that as part of it moving forward will deal with it. And then noise, can absolutely understand that as an impact that residents in the surrounding buildings would have, and rightly an impact they would be concerned with. There's a lot in the officer's report talking to the acoustic panelling and set up around the edges, how landscaping's been positioned, the position of the buildings and the orientation. So a lot of work has gone into making sure that impact is mitigated. So for all those reasons and others, I'm very happy to support the recommendation of officers today. We'll take that as the close. I will move to take the vote. All those in favour? Division is called. Councillor Hamill, Councillor Young, Councillor Fowler, Councillor Gates, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Doran, Councillor O'Neill. Against? Councillor Martin. Would you like us to record that, Councillor Martin?
Appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Please record Councillor Martin was definitely in the negative. Monique, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Councillors, we're about to probably get into our last meatier item of the day. So could I suggest if we're going to take a break, we take a short break now so that we don't end up taking one through the next item. It's 10:24, so we're going to recommence in 10 minutes exactly. Meeting adjourned. Welcome back, councillors. That takes us to item 6.3 on the agenda. We welcome Liam, Joel and Tim. Straight into the presentation, please.
Cool. Good morning, councillors. Through the Chair, the proposal is for a development permit for a material change of use to establish multiple dwelling and short-term accommodation, 73 units, shop, neighbourhood store and healthcare services. The address is 6 to 8 Stephen Street and 37 Little Norman Street, Southport. The development application is subject to impact assessment. The proposed development seeks to establish a 13-storey residential tower, being 43.5 metres in height. The ground level includes 2 commercial tenancies and 3 levels of basement are proposed. The subject site is located in Southport and is identified as being within an urban neighbourhood area. To the north is Labrador, which is zoned medium and high density residential, and to the south is the Southport PDA. Higher intensity development is contemplated along Stephen Street and Marine Parade, which then tapers down to the west. The subject site is located within a city block with different building height designations of 29 metres along Stephen Street and Marine Parade and 2 stories 9 metres along Little Norman Street. The subject site comprises 3 lots with a total site area of 1,748 metres squared. 6 to 8 Stephen Street are the 2 northern lots, and 37 Little Norman Street is the southern lot. One of the lots is vacant, while the other 2 are improved by dwelling houses. The eastern adjacent lot comprises the dual occupancy, and the southern adjacent lot comprises a multiple dwelling. The subject site has a building height designation of 29 metres for 6 to 8 Stephen Street, and 2 stories 9 metres for 37 Little Norman Street. You can see the change in building height across the subject site on the screen. One of the main considerations of the proposal was building height. Most of the development is contained within 6 to 8 Stephen Street and does not exceed above 50% of the map building height designation, being 43.5 metres. However, a portion of the site is located within 37 Little Norman Street, which does exceed beyond 50% above the building height designation. Due to the extent of tower form within 37 Little Norman Street, the proposed development is non-compliant with specific outcome 3.3.2.110, which states that increases beyond 50% above the building height designation are not anticipated in urban areas. Despite this non-compliance, officers consider the subject site can accommodate the proposed building height. The tangible impacts of the development have been assessed, and officers have determined that in this circumstance, the building height does not result in any adverse impacts on neighbouring lots or the character of the locality. As seen in the red hatching, the extent of tower form within 37 Little Norman Street constitutes approximately 15% of the total tower floor plate. The extent of tower form within the 2-storey 9 metre area will be largely inconceivable within the context of the broader locality and maintain significant separation distance to the southern adjoining lot. Due to the lot configuration and tower siting, setbacks to the southern adjacent lot are 2.8 to 4.5 metres for the first 3 levels, which is AO compliant. The setback to the tower form then increases to 4 to 17 metres for the upper levels. The southern interface provides a high degree of modulation, and generous landscaped areas are provided at the lower levels. Officers' assessment has determined the design provides a well-managed interface, which has not resulted in any unacceptable impacts to shadowing, privacy, and amenity. Officers consider the consolidation of 3 lots to be an efficient use of land, which ensures the proposal is appropriately sited and designed to manage external impacts. The additional height and density deliver grading housing choice and affordability within the area. The subject site is well located in terms of access to recreational, transport and economic services, and the mixture of land uses contributes to compact and pedestrian-friendly neighbourhoods as sought by City Plan. As noted previously, the proposal exceeds the 50% building height uplift threshold. However, in consideration of the development's impacts, officers have given regard to the 50% uplift criteria contained within specific outcome at 3.3.2.19. Officers' assessment determined the proposal complies with all 9 of the uplift criteria. This assists with demonstrating the proposal presents a good planning outcome and that there is a lack of impact caused by the development. During public notification, a total of 11 submissions were received, consisting of 9 properly made and 2 not properly made submissions. All submissions objected to the proposal. The key themes raised in the submissions are displayed on the screen and have been assessed throughout the report. As a whole, officers consider the proposed development constitutes a beneficial planning outcome. The development provides a mixture of uses, which will add to the range of local services and housing options in the area. Additionally, the development presents no unacceptable impacts to neighbours or the local character. Therefore, officers recommend that this application be approved subject to conditions. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much for the presentation. Is there questions for officers? No? Councillor Patterson?
I'm happy to move it when you're ready.
If there's no questions, we can go straight to moving. Very good. Councillor Patterson is happy to move. Is there a seconder for the item? Councillor Gates is happy to second. Councillor Patterson, to you to open.
Thank you, Chair. This development had to come here because of that particular extension over that second block. But I do wish to acknowledge the applicant and the officers for really getting a great outcome. This will make a big change to the area. It is going to enhance that area on Stephen Street. There's engagement in there, and I'm very pleased with the interface of it, the look of it. I love the brick. Bring all the brick to Southport, please. And I'm very happy to support it and hope the applicant brings more like this to Southport in the future. Thank you.
Anyone to speak against the officer recommendation? Councillor Peter Young.
Thanks, Chairman. Very briefly, I won't be supporting the application. I don't think it presents an excellent design or finish, and I think it will be considered a significant imposition on the area by the local community. I know it's what's envisaged, but at this point in time there's a transition, and I don't think this is a transitory sort of development outcome.
Thanks to Councillor Young for your contribution. Anyone wishing to speak for? In that case, I might just speak for quickly before I go to Councillor Patterson to close. Just to acknowledge, I think it's a great example of when officers are presented with a technical non-compliance and when they apply that lens of what is the true impact of that technical non-compliance. This is one that the first version of this building on this site was going to be knocked back, and officers working with the applicant, there has been a raft of changes made to this from what was originally put out to public notification to what's presented today. And while I appreciate Councillor Young's comments around the architecture, I personally believe it's a significant improvement to what the original building form was going to look like, and that it will be a great outcome for the area. Again, say thank you to officers. I know there was some strong discussion around the technical non-compliance and how to get to a way of supporting it, and I think we've got to a great outcome. Councillor Patterson, would you like to close?
Thank you, Chair. I do think it is certainly a benefit to this site that the strategic outcomes were considered, that it did have to be considered past code because we do have a better property. We know that there is a huge demand for development like this. The Southport CBD and Northern CBD has been identified as a place to build this, and yes, looking forward to seeing it be realised.
Debate is closed. We'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Officers, thank you very much. Apologies. Please note that Councillor Gates voted in the affirmative. That takes us to item 6.4. We welcome Philip and Mark and Joel. I think Scott's with it. There he is. Scott's with us as well. So, Councillor Tozer, I know you had an interest in this one. Do you need the presentation, or happy just to go to questions?
I've had a presentation about this one, and I wouldn't mind speaking to it. If other people would like a presentation, I wouldn't object to it, but I just wanted a chance to speak at committee instead of full council.
Committee members, does anyone wish to see the presentation on this one? It's the same presentation you've had already, Councillor Gates. So Councillor Gates, Councillor Doran and I have had the same presentation that Councillor Tozer would have. So unless there's any committee member wishing for the presentation, I'll go straight to questions and then straight to the recommendation. In that case, I'll go straight to questions. Did you have any questions, Councillor Tozer?
So the question I'll ask is just that I'm not the biggest fan of groundwater extraction, particularly putting spring water in bottles. I don't really like that in general. But there's particular elements of the presentation I'm sure you've got there that talks about where this is in the context of Springbrook National Park and also where this is in the topography of the area. Is there one slide you could go to and just quickly summarise that for people who might be interested in this from the public?
First and foremost, you can see that it's outside of that moratorium area.
Yep, so it's outside the moratorium area.
But this slide here probably highlights that topography that you're referring to and the separation from a national park that's located to the rear. The proposed activity area, being the bores, are located on the eastern side, the lower area where it's separated by a river, and then the topography increases. It's quite a large site as well. It's over a kilometre long, so there's significant separation from those environmental sensitive features.
That's the slide I wanted to be in the public domain today. So.
A question, Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. Just whilst on that slide, just to highlight for me why that's important, is that because given the location of the land, there's no flow-on effect or downriver effects because it is at the bottom of the aquifer?
In part, we do have an expert here from EMM Consulting who will help us through that process, so I can hand over to him to answer some technical questions, but it's more in relation to its separation from those other sensitive receivers, and the activity area is really contained within a 150 metre radius, which is predominantly within the subject site as well. So it's not going to have any flow-on effects to the wider area.
Chair, also to clarify, this is a development approval, but there is already a state permit for the extraction?
Through the Chair, so there is permits that exist over the site, however they're for separate sort of water extraction use that aren't associated with these proposed bores. The applicant following on from this application would then need to lodge an application with the state for those water licences to extract water from the bores, and that's separate to our DA process, Councillor Doran.
And can you speak to the assessment as to the environmental impacts of this operation on the site? Any negative impacts on the environment that was assessed?
Yeah, so through the Chair, the location of the bores are in a completely cleared area or where there are no mapped vegetation. Like I said before, the potential impacted area is really that 150 metre radius from the proposed bore. So there's no impact onto those environmental significant features, and it's well contained within that area.
Last question, Chair. And could you just speak to the amount of intensity in relation to trucks entering and exit the site? Is there an expected amount that's going to be entering the site, and how many is that?
Yes, so through the Chair, only 3 truck water collections are proposed a day between Monday to Saturday, and we've conditioned that that's the maximum number that could occur.
Question, Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chair. What does that white circle represent?
So that's the cone of depression, Councillor. So the area where drawdown could occur, and that it doesn't really extend generally past that ring.
Okay, I have a question for the officers, why they did not suggest the relocation or a new bore rather than bore 1 and move it to the other boundary.
So through the chair, all the bores are existing on site, so that's the an existing bore. It's actually well located, with given that it is actually centrally located and away from environmental features that are located within the middle portions of the site. So it is generally a more favourable location already.
And was the adjacent property a submitter, please?
Through the chair, no, they were not, but they were notified through the public notification process.
Thank you.
Councillors, any other questions for Scott or any of the officers? In that case, I'm happy to move the item. Is there a seconder? Councillor Doran. I'm happy to defer to Councillor Tozer to speak on the item.
Thank you, Councillor Hamill. There's no doubt that there's a large group of people who live out in Division 9 and really across the city who are generally ideologically opposed to drawing water out of the ground and putting it in plastic bottles. And frankly, there's plastic waste in the city, in our nation, is a big issue and across the world. And so there's some ideological issues with that. And I don't want to start by not acknowledging that some people just don't like water in plastic bottles. What I can say is that our planning legislation, and both at the state and at the local level, enables us and obligates us to assess applications when they come to us. And under the current legislation at both state and local level, there's probably not too many better places for this land use to occur than here. There's a couple of particular reasons for that. Not that I'm a specialist, but this particular site is right at the bottom of the valley. To the east is Springbrook Mountain, and to the west is Binnaburra. Hang on, have I done that right? That's right, isn't it? Yeah, I did it right. And at the bottom of the valley is a road known as NERANG Road. This property sits right on NERANG Road. And whilst we've seen applications for water extraction on the top of the mountain at different times where rainfall is heavy, this particular application is right at the bottom of the valley. It's really the lowest point in the surrounding area where all the water that might, water the greenery in our World Heritage Biodiversity areas right up on top of the hill. This is where it all falls to. It trickles down the hills on both sides into this valley. There's some lovely little creeks down there, and it's all very nice. But this particular spot is really the lowest point. I don't like the idea of supporting water extraction principally, but I do respect that this is the best place that we could possibly have this sort of land use occurring, and I want to, congratulate the officers. They did a really good job of helping me understand that. My first impression with this application was pretty negative, and by going through a comprehensive presentation that kind of understood all the issues, both environmental and traffic movement, I think they've ultimately delivered some quite stringent conditions, not only based on the application, but also based on previous court decisions and the precedent set in the Planning and Environment Court for applications we've previously rejected or refused and have been tested in courts. Councillors, I hope you do support this today. I don't like supporting bottled water necessarily, but this is the right place for this sort of land use to occur on this occasion. Thanks.
Councillor Tozer, thank you for that. That's a really important local divisional councillor contribution. Does any committee member wish to speak against the officer recommendation? In that case, I won't close and we'll go straight to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. Please record Councillor Gates voted in the affirmative. Please record Councillor Young voted in the negative. Officers, thank you very much. Councillors, that takes us to item 6.5.
Looking forward to this one. Go on, Councillor Doran, what have you got?
We welcome Ainsley and the team in to discuss regulatory approach to election signage.
Okay.
Good morning, officers. I'm guessing there's an interest from committee in the presentation on this one? Yeah, so we'll have the presentation, please.
Through the Chair, good morning, councillors. This agenda item provides you with an update on the review of the City's regulatory approach to election signage on public land and proposes to introduce newly developed election signage standards and the inclusion of this activity within the City's local laws. Which arrow? There we go. Okay. By way of background, at the Planning and Regulation Committee meeting on the 14th of May, a general business item was raised, and that was to review election signage regulatory approach and the applicable laws and operational guidelines to be considered for modification and report back to Council. So the Policy and Standards team has undertaken this review, taking into consideration factors such as legislative requirements and in consultation with our General Counsel branch, confirming that the City does have authority to impose additional restrictions where there is a need to balance political communication with public safety and community standards, and that these additional restrictions can be included within our local laws. We also looked at the City's current regulatory approach, and since 2017, there has been an informal guidance-based approach in place with no reference to election signage on public land within the City's current local laws. The current informal approach has been supported by Election Signage Guidelines, a document which is available on the City's website and developed to inform candidates on the requirements for the placement of election signage on public land during an election period. The current guidelines are included as Attachment 1 in this committee agenda item. We also undertook benchmarking with Brisbane City Council, Logan City Council and the City of Moreton Bay to understand and compare their regulatory approach to election signage on public land. Of interest was that all of these local governments currently regulate election signage on public land through their respective local laws. Their policy positions also cover a lot more than our current regulatory approach, with guidelines focusing on the placement of election signage only. The other local governments also include quite specific requirements, which include things like the maximum size of the sign, the condition of the sign, and the number of signs that are actually permitted. As part of the review, we also took into consideration community and candidate feedback, and in particular, feedback on election signage from the recent March local government election and also the recent state government election, which occurred in October. The majority of this feedback related to the size of signs, that some were too large, and the number of signs, that there were too many signs being placed at one location. As well as there were general concerns raised on public safety and road safety, including signs being placed at busy intersections, in the middle of the street, in school zones, close to pedestrian crossings, and that motorists should concentrate on driving and not be distracted by such signage. So taking all of these review factors into consideration, today we're proposing that a more formalised regulatory approach to election signage on public land be adopted. This would involve an amendment to Subordinate Local Law 16.8, advertising devices, to include provisions to formally regulate election signage on public land. This amendment would also provide improved clarity for compliance purposes and for our compliance officers, and provide a single local law to regulate election signage within. This amendment would also offer a stronger stance to ensure that public safety is maintained during an election period. To support the proposed local law amendment, we have developed election signage standards. These are included as Attachment 2 to this committee report. These standards would replace the current informal guidelines and include additional specific requirements designed to facilitate public safety and road safety. So the additional requirements relate to the construction of the sign and also the location and placement of the sign. Within construction, we have included limitations on the maximum size of the sign, which we have stipulated as being 600 millimetres by 900 millimetres, which is your standard normal core flute sign, the condition of the sign, and the material that is used to construct the sign. These limitations are aligned to state legislation and TMR's requirements for election signage on state-controlled roads and the Electoral Commission Queensland's limitations at polling booths. We also took into account the findings from the benchmarking activity that we undertook. These requirements have been included to mitigate the potential risk that large, heavy and/or damaged signs could cause to members of the community. Consistency in size and material also minimises visual clutter, driver distraction and allows motorists a clear line of sight. It should be noted that while some of the signs and banners used in recent elections are similar in size to large advertising signs such as billboards around the city, the key difference is that they require a licence. So advertising billboards and large advertising device signage, they go through a full assessment process as part of their licence application, which may include such things as traffic engineering assessments, building certification and the like, depending on their size and placement. With regard to location and placement, the proposed standards will limit the number of signs that can be placed at a single location. This has been identified as 2 signs per candidate or party within a 100-metre radius. The 2-sign restriction is consistent with state legislation as it directly aligns once again to the Electoral Commission Queensland's legislative requirements for election signage in and around pre-polling booth locations. It also ensures fair and equitable access to public space for all candidates. Again, it minimises visual clutter, driver distraction and allows motorists that clear line of sight. The standards include placement restrictions such as placing signs at a minimum distance from the edge of the traffic lane depending on the speed limit, not placing signs on certain road reserve areas such as roundabouts, traffic islands, median strips, or attaching them to council infrastructure or vegetation, an example of which can be seen on the slide there in front of you. In summary, the standards have been developed to ensure public safety and road safety, with election signs displayed in a manner that minimises the risk to the community. So today, following our review of the current regulatory approach to election signage on public land, we are recommending to commence the process of drafting an amendment to Subordinate Local Law 16.8. This amendment would include the provision to formally regulate election signs on public land, and as part of the local lawmaking process, the proposed amendment would come back to this committee for consideration at a future meeting. It would also go through the normal state interest checks and public consultation as well. So secondly, to support the local law amendment, we are recommending the introduction of election signage standards, with these standards providing the city's policy position in relation to election signage on public land. Thank you.
So councillors, I wouldn't mind with this because I'm aware that Councillor Doran has a proposed change recommendation to it. I wouldn't mind getting the change recommendation up just so that might bring some context, some other questions we're going to ask if everyone's happy with that approach. So Councillor Doran, if we've got your change recommendation loaded in the system, I'm happy just to put it up on the screen for now and then we'll ask some questions before we look for a mover and a seconder. So that would be added as a 3 to the existing recommendation.
So that's a number 3, Tim.
Oh yeah, yeah. I proposed number 3. So I wouldn't mind first, only because I heard Councillor Gates say that doesn't work, so I'm guessing there's a concern with the wording. So could I get Councillor Gates' input into the wording first?
I'm sorry, that was as a standalone item because of the need to go through the local law process. So,
all right. Okay, that's better. So I'm happy to leave that up on the screen because it focuses on something I heard as feedback from a few of you around concerns around the regulation of this moving forward. So I'm happy to take questions now for officers or questions on the recommendation. I had Councillor Tozer first and Councillor Patterson.
So my first question is the standard portrait election sign, what's its size?
We can grab it for you. We can do a show and tell if you like.
Great.
Do you want to grab it back?
That'd be lovely.
Yeah.
Is it mine? Who have we got?
It's a blank one.
Can I just contribute to the suggested, just while this is happening? The problem, if you're looking for resourcing, is that it would need to be a budget decision. So I mean, if it's about making sure that we have the appropriate staff to actually manage the policy, it would need to be something considered at budget, which would be 9 months ahead of the next election.
Councillor Gates, if you don't mind, we'll come back to that if there's a need to finesse in this year. We'll go back to the original question from Councillor Tozer.
So that's what I thought. Its size is 600 by 900, is that?
Through the chair, correct.
Yeah, cool, awesome. So at the last state election, I started to see a trend amongst state candidates that they were using double-sized ones landscape. Yeah, quite large. So what this new policy basically says is that is the only size or smaller that can be used on public land.
Through the chair, that is the maximum size that will be permitted.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I've noticed just in Division 9, we have lots of kind of traffic, is that there is quite a lot of fences around sporting fields that get used, and I actually favour that fence option, not as a candidate, but just from an amenity point of view, than a freestanding post. Part of the reason is that the freestanding posts often will fall down, and particularly with candidates who are kind of being a bit, you know, maybe they're just kind of new at it and they get the really skinny ones, which aren't that great, where they fall down everywhere, whereas the fences are just a bit, rookie mistakes. They make rookie mistakes. Was there anything in the report or anything, I mean, obviously what I read, was there anything in your investigation that led you to believe that those standardised roll-top fences that we have in places were, and if there's any safety reason why we wouldn't use those, or was it only just an amenity piece?
Through the chair, it is an amenity piece. It's also the damage that can be caused to the fences when signage is attached to them. And there has also been reports of, you know, cable ties and wire and that sort of material being left for city officers to clean up afterwards as well. We have actually put in a suggested recommendation that it not be attached to council infrastructure such as fences.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
Yeah.
So, and that's based on the leftover litter.
Sorry?
Like you said, they leave cable ties behind. There's very bad candidates out there who leave their cable ties. I'm really frustrated by that. I'm actually not supportive of removing fences. I think that is going to, particularly as a bunch of sitting councillors, I think that's going to be problematic, and I think that's going to send the wrong message to candidates. And I think the idea of in attachment 2, which is your proposed election signage standards, I think that not be attached to any to infrastructure or vegetation such as buildings, poles, existing signs, street furniture or trees, omitting the word fences, I think is probably...
So I'm happy to take, we'll go to a few more questions, and if we get to a change recommendation or we may make those kind of revisions, I'm happy to look at that then.
Yeah, and so what will then, under this new policy, what will be the process when a local law officer or an officer sees a sign that is non-compliant?
Through the chair, it will be similar to the approach now, which is to obtain voluntary compliance in the first instance. So it would be getting in contact with the candidate and asking them to remove the sign if it was placed in an unsafe manner. They would have a reasonable amount of time to remove that sign. If they didn't remove that sign, the sign would be removed and it would be taken to a holding facility where they would be advised, again, that they could collect that sign. Then we can move into other, and I can hand this over to Luke if he did want to answer the enforcement side of things. But obviously when we've done our benchmarking activity, it is also open to issuing warnings, compliance notices and infringement notices too. But again, the first instance would be to obtain voluntary compliance.
Okay, so voluntary compliance. And in relation to private land, during the election period, when a candidate does erect a larger sign than the 600 by 900 on private land, are we, during that election period, going to just let them do that, or are we going to take other action there as well?
Through the chair, that is currently within local law 16.8, that within the election period, so the day after the writ and the day that polling closes, that private land can have election signs placed on them.
And there isn't a limitation around
Correct.
size around that. So if we have any larger signs, they've got to go on private land. If a candidate has the correct size, they, under the current policy, not with my suggested changes, they have to actually hammer it into the ground with some sort of structure, some sort of post. Yeah. When we get to it, I'll speak to it.
Can I seek clarification first before I come to Councillor Patterson, and I'll get the other hands. But would there be anything stopping us? So you mentioned reasonable time frame, and there was very quickly a bit of concern in the committee. So would there be anything stopping us and making it a specific time frame? So, you know, an applicant has 24 hours or 48 hours to remove the sign before it's removed?
Through the Chair, I think the only limitation there would be in terms of city resourcing. So in terms of the time frame, just being able to, one, let the candidates have that sufficient time to actually make the adjustments, and then two, for us to actually check that it's been done.
So add Councillor Patterson, Councillor Gates, Councillor Fowler, Councillor Young, Councillor Wilkinson, Councillor Doran. Let's move. And councillors, so I'm going to be a bit strict here. Questions.
Okay.
If you're looking at changes, we'll get to that. Questions, and then we'll move on with general conversation.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I support the changes in principle. My concern is when I look at the current election signage guidelines, they are not enforced. So my concern is enforcement. If we can't enforce our current guidelines, how are we going to enforce these new guidelines?
Through the Chair, Councillor, in terms of, I guess, the enforcement approach, the intent would be to take a proactive approach to enforcing those that are community safety aspects. That would be officers actively looking in areas where we know election signage is typically located, identifying any public safety issues and then dealing with it immediately through that removal that Joe has just mentioned. The reactive component would probably be for the remainder of those aspects in the guideline, and that would be on a complaints basis.
Yeah, just a follow-up question. So I do have a concern about that, because there'll be people who abide by the rules and there'll be people who don't abide by the rules. And if you bring this in without appropriate enforcement, you are rewarding people who aren't going to play by the rules. Because you've already said, unless it's a significant safety hazard, and that I'd say that I've seen, anyway, if it's not a safety hazard, then we'll take our time. So 7 days can be a big time in an election, right? If someone has something that's not compliant, but they're willing to do it anyway. So that's, yeah. So I suppose, my apologies, Chair, that is more of a statement than a question. I don't think that this can go through without significant resourcing for enforcement, and it can't be just on this is
So, Councillor, if there's no question, we'll move on. Councillor Gates.
Thank you. There's been a trend over recent years to have candidates standing waving their signs at busy intersections. Would the 100-metre rule for signage apply in those situations?
Through the Chair, if the sign is actually placed on the footpath, yes. If they're waving a placard type sign, that is, if it's on a state-controlled road, that is referred to TMR and becomes a QPS matter.
Thank you. And does a sign include banners? I mean, you've been specific about core flutes being of a specific material and size. So do we mention banners anywhere? Because banners have become very popular as well.
Through the Chair, that's similar to in the presentation when I referred to billboards. So banners would go through a licence approval process, and that would be assessed by our permit officers.
Okay.
It is not included within the current proposed standards that are being put forward today.
Okay. And on election day, what will the rules be on election day at the polling booths? Because you mentioned pre-poll, and I think you suggested that our regulation would apply at pre-poll. But On election day, I was of the understanding that the Electoral Commission is in control. So how do we arrange for a different outcome at pre-poll than would be on election day?
Through the Chair, you're quite correct, Councillor Gates. Pre-polling booths, it is the Electoral Commission Queensland that regulate within the 100-metre radius of that area. Anything outside of the 100-metre radius, it is the City of Gold Coast that would regulate. So we have aligned our standards with Electoral Commission Queensland in that they allow at pre-polling booths 2 signs per 100-metre radius. So that's where we have aligned the standards.
It was pretty different at Helensvale last time, I can tell you. Okay, thank you.
Another question, Councillor?
No, that's fine.
So Councillor Fowler and Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I was just curious to know, are any of the recommendations we're putting forward inconsistent with state law, and if so, which ones? Because I'm just aware that the state law overrides the local law in this instance.
Through the Chair, we have consulted with General Counsel who have done a thorough review of all of the information, the committee report and the standards that we're proposing, and there is no inconsistency there. So we have taken that into consideration.
Thank you, Chair. And just one follow-on. I was just following on from Councillor Tozer's comment. In my view and in my experience, having single core flutes with wooden stakes is, in my view, a lot from a visual impact, but also just they break, they snap, and to me, the fences are actually less impact for the community than the stakes. So
I'll take that as a statement instead of a question and go to Councillor Young for a question.
Thanks, Chairman. So how do these rules apply to public parks, please?
Through the Chair, they apply in public parks as well, all public land.
Thank you.
That's all, Councillor Young?
Yes, I think so.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to ask Luke Ainsley about enforcement. During the last state election, I raised a number of issues where signs were in roundabouts. This seeks to correct and give some teeth to that. I'd like you to tell us a little bit more detail about how you're going to enforce this so illegally placed signs don't stay out for a long period of time. Noting the 7 days is probably not going to fly.
Through the Chair, Councillor, just to clarify, so in that particular scenario, you're talking about signage that provides a community safety issue obstructing visibility around a roundabout, is that correct?
In this question, it's about something it's been installed in contravention to attachment 2, the proposed election signage standards. So I'll use an example, a core flute sign of that size in the middle of a roundabout.
Through the Chair, Councillor, in that particular instance where, there is a really key defined assessment whether it is going to disrupt visual or create some sort of community safety issue specific to that roadway, it would be removed immediately when identified, and that's either through those proactive patrols conducted by our city laws officers or alternatively through a complaint that would be picked up as soon as possible. In the instance where it doesn't cause a specific community safety issue, perhaps a slight amendment to that specific scenario, then that would be done on a resource priority basis. So whilst that's within that 7 days, that 7 days would be inclusive of talking to the candidate around the specific issue that's been identified and trying to get that resolved as quickly as possible with a number of checks to see that it's being done within that time frame.
Just to follow up, Chair. So resourcing is going to be a challenge. Are you anticipating the need to add more resourcing ahead of the implementation of these new guidelines, or do you think that you're appropriately staffed to be able to manage that without leaving it so long that it becomes impactful on the results of the election?
Through the Chair, in terms of, I guess, the current resourcing, certainly considering that with this particular guideline involved, but I guess my core response to that is that we've got sufficient resourcing to meet those community safety issues in particular and to still address those issues which are identified through complaint basis.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thanks, Chair. My question is really around about recognising that it is election signage, and this is a bit of a grey area, I know. We had a situation at a pre-poll during the council election in my area where there was a signage that wasn't properly endorsed as election signage, and it was outside the 100 metre radius for the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission just said, look, it's outside our area, it can stay there. And there was no, it wasn't authorised by anybody, but it was election signage for sure. I'm just wondering if there is a complaint made, will we move on it, especially if it's on public land? And it was on public land.
Through the chair, councillor, yes, I think in that specific instance we'd be able to action that accordingly.
Fantastic, thanks.
My apologies, Councillor Wilkinson. I skipped you out of that leap. So Councillor Wilkinson and Councillor Martin. And
no worries, Chair. It's fine. I knew you'd get to me. Look, firstly, I think there's some really good outcomes coming from the proposed changes that are being put forward. I would actually agree with Councillor Tozer and what he's put forward. I think that's really sensible. My question comes off the back of what Councillor Gates was more or less touching on, but more relevant towards the election day signage itself. Now, if we're aligning to state regulations around this, I would note that they actually permit up to 6 signs on an election day, and of those signs, you can actually have larger signs, which are the 1830 millimetres by 1220 millimetres. So therefore, my question would be, is giving consideration that we're aligning to that, I guess, kind of model, is that something that would be permissible, but under our current rules, it doesn't seem to acknowledge that larger signage perhaps on election days? Yeah, and well, pre-poll, no, it's only 2 small signs. That's correct. But it's election day itself. There's a difference there, which isn't acknowledged, I think, in what we're putting forward. So I just wanted to seek clarity around what we were thinking specifically for election days in that respect.
Through the chair to Councillor Wilkinson. So specifically what you were referring to is election day at polling stations, which is regulated by the Electoral Commission. So that still stands. You know, but what we're proposing is not inconsistent with that, and our proposal is for the whole election period and doesn't make any adjustments for election day.
Follow up.
Thank you for that clarity, Ainsley, because my thought was if it was a community centre, for instance, and a lot of these are, if there was a sign within 100 metres, which there usually are, you know, in that respect, would an additional 6 signs still be permitted given the proximity? That's the question I guess I'm asking, and I understand that it's the state or the responsibility of the Queensland Electoral Commission for their asset for that particular time period. However, is that going to be problematic for us as far as future candidates if there's a sign just out or within that 100 metres from an actual booth location? Is that going to cause any kind of conflict or challenge, I guess, on that front?
Through the chair, no, I don't think it will, Councillor. We're you know, and our officers are across polling, pre-polling, and outside of that. So there are 3 different circumstances, and whilst it makes things a little bit confusing, Luke's officers are more than capable of, you know, applying those 3 or understanding of the 3 different circumstances across an election period and election day.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the officers, just a question on that point number 3 around strategy. I guess reflecting back on the election, I know that some signage in areas, maybe the officers were more heavy-handed than other areas. So just looking, I guess, consistency on that approach citywide. Does will this essentially do that we have a consistency of an enforcement across all areas?
Through the chair, Councillor, in terms of, I guess, consistency, I think we can probably say that will occur. The exception to that, though, is just in terms of complaint basis. So obviously, if we're getting a large number of complaints that are driving a specific area, then we're going to be obligated to respond to that, which might have contributed to what you're talking about there in terms of one area versus another. But certainly in terms of a consistent approach to the specific issues, that's certainly something we'll be focusing on.
Would you mind, Luke, if I could just follow on that? So part of the reason that this may help with consistency is that everything is very clear in one local law, which then be made very clear to all candidates beforehand, whereas at the moment this is wrapped up across 2 or 3 different pieces of local law, and then you've got different local law officers in different parts of the city trying to apply it there. That this would actually help with that consistency because it's all in one local law and it's updated and can be reflected across the entire city.
Chair, I think that's correct, and if this particular recommendation is supported, then we'll be looking to implement that through an education process for our officers as well to make sure that we're really across that and consistent across the board.
Do you have another question, Councillor Martin? Councillor Curtis, we're over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I know in the proposed new standards there is mention of private land just exempting it from having an advertising device licence, but does it hold the same rules of the amount of election signage permitted, and do we have the powers to enforce that restriction on private land?
Through the Chair, that is included in the current Subordinate Local Law 16.8, and that exemption period is during the election period. There are not conditions specific to the standards that we've created here for public land. When we do the local law amendment and the proposed to make, we can certainly look at the private land conditions and what is and isn't included to get some consistency as well.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. Just have one quick follow-up question for just listening to the conversation. Would it be the case that during the election period, the determined prescribed period, if a city officer is in the community and sees an illegally placed sign, will they act or will they require it to be reported by another party before action is taken?
Through the Chair, no, Councillor, in that particular instance, they would be authorised to act if they're a city laws officer in this particular instance. So, if it was that community safety issue in particular, we'd be really focused on dealing with that
so
as a priority.
Community safety issue, according to the policy, would be acted on immediately, but if it was maybe 3 metres instead of 3.4 metres, they would begin the process of as outlined in terms of correcting that by giving them whatever time we prescribe.
Through the Chair, that's correct. Again, there'd be on the ground, depending on the amount of tasks, there'd be a priority associated with that, depending on what they're also dealing with. But yes, the answer is that they would be following that up.
I think that would be great. We hate to see candidates spend half their time reporting other signs rather than talking to voters. So good.
Okay, councillors, I think everyone has had a crack at this with questions, so I'd like to pull up on two things. I'm very much sensing that there is a strong support of the idea that fences not be excluded. No? Okay, maybe it's not as strong as I thought, so I'm actually interested in a bit of an idea here, and this can be open to everybody, but is there a position on if fences should be excluded or included? I'm happy to get a little bit of comment, and then I'm literally going to do it by a straw poll kind of setup. So Councillor Tozer first and Councillor Gates.
Look, I think it's I think it sends a really bad optic message to the public that as sitting councillors we would exclude fences, firstly. I think that's a problematic situation. I actually think that signs on fences result in less obstruction, and they're less, and once I have a sign on a fence in a particular location, it means I'm within 100 metres, I'm not going to be allowed to see another sign on a post, which I think is a good thing. And I think those structures that are already fenced are actually quite often kind of around intersections where cars are actually, they're driving quite slowly or stopped at an intersection and things like that. I think that's a really positive thing. I'd strongly say that we should maintain that fences should be okay.
Councillor Gates, your thoughts?
I disagree unless there's a stipulation that it is a chain wire fence or some form of stipulation about what type of fence, because we have fences around a lot of our stormwater assets. You think of the compliance officers, how are they going to judge where an acceptable fence is and an unacceptable fence is? I mean, I just think it's crazy, and I think you're overburdening the officers who are going to be involved in compliance unless there's a very clear indication that it's fences around sporting fields or something similar. But just to put fences in, I think it's crazy. They'll be on the back of fences fronting public land. It opens up a minefield in my view.
Councillor Wilkinson, you want to make a contribution?
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate Councillor Gates's comments on this, but I still tend to float towards what Councillor Tozer is saying. I think if you go and exclude fences, I think what you'd end up seeing is a proliferation of signs on sticks that are in the exact same locations already that, again, would be probably less stable, I would argue, than what would be on a fence. Given that there's already leniency applied to election periods under our existing policy, I don't think that having fences included in this would actually be of any detriment. If it was excluded, I think that it would be of actual benefit for the larger election space. Again, that's kind of how I feel towards this, and I just thought I'd add that to the contribution of the conversation.
So I'm going to make a quick contribution as well, that I am probably supportive of fences remaining as well. I think the fact that I'm coming at it from a point of view of the visual amenity clutter that you get. I don't mean to pick on Councillor Wilkinson here, but when I think of what I drove through in your division during election time, you know, as much as I love your face, seeing 10 of them up on one fence is too many. So I think the fact that the restriction on only 2 within 100 metres will achieve what the community's main concern is, which is just that visual dump that goes on. And I do tend to agree there's nothing worse than seeing signs down on stakes that were too flimsy or that are knocked over. You know, the mowing contractors, they get in the way of that. If it limits a bit more of that, it's not a bad thing. So unless anyone is dying to make a contribution, I am going to do this by Councillor Curtis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just a little bit uncomfortable with the change recommendation.
Yes, I'm not at that. I want to get through fences first. So contribution on if fences are in or out before I take a straw poll on that being in or out.
This will be a strange one coming from me because I have put a few up on fences, but I do think if we're going to make this substantial change, it is really going to send quite a different message that election's going to look really different. And I do think that we are creating a lot of pain for our officers if we put these things in and then we don't, and then we do allow it on fences. Having said that, my husband, who actually does the work, will say, what were you saying? It's much easier to put it up. Mind you, we were really rigorous about taking those silly little ties off, and you would see little bits of ties everywhere. So I get that that's annoying as well.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there for now. So I'm literally going to do this by straw poll, and it's open to everyone here today because it is a council policy piece. So those who agree that fences should be excluded, I'm just getting a sense of the group. So councillors who would agree, it's not a vote. We haven't got to that stage yet. I'm looking for if fences are in or out of a proposed policy. So those that think fences should be excluded from the policy, yeah, not allowed. So you can't put stuff on fences. Yep. Okay, so I got Councillor Gates and Councillor Patterson support nothing on fences. Am I getting a read that everyone else thinks fences are okay? I'm seeing nodding heads everywhere. Councillor Young, you're okay with fences? Councillor Curtis, okay with fences? Yeah. So I mean I'm happy to take that as fences. Fences should be. So
what
left.
Type of fences? I mean, chain wire fences at exit 57 go the whole way along the side of the road.
You can only have 2. You can only have 2.
Metre radius. You can't have more than 2 within 100 metres. That's the next question.
But is it 2 per candidate?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we won't achieve anything.
Well,
anyway.
Yeah. So I'll take the will of the committee, and I do disagree because instead of seeing 6 or 7 put next to each other from each candidate, only 2 from each candidate is a difference. So I'm going to take that as the will here today that fences would be removed from the policy. And do you need that in the recommendation, Ainsley?
I believe, Councillor Hamill, Chair, that we can make an amendment to the appendix, to the attachment, so that we don't have to change the recommendation. But I would like to just reiterate that when we talk about fences and excluding them, these would only be council-owned fences. So if we're talking down the side of a motorway, you're under DTMR. If it's private fencing, you need to seek permission from the property owner. So this would only include council fences, and And of course, Councillor Hamill will have the conversation with the asset custodian about the weighting on the fencing, that we're not creating an additional load that would become a safety issue prior to coming back to council with our proposed to make, if that works well.
Understood. So is this about fences still? Right. So just to make that clear, so fences in the attachment can be removed so that they're on fences are okay, and that is just council fences. Private fences and DTMR fences are a different thing.
Through you, Chair. So that will make our policy different from all the other councillors that you surveyed, or so we'll be the only one allowing
correct
signage on fences?
Correct.
Thank you for your opinion, Councillor Patterson. I'm just following the will of the rest of your colleagues. Councillor Toes, your question?
So on page 787, which is the first page of the attachment to the proposed election signage standards, one adjustment that I'd recommend is that where it says what is the criteria for election signage, where it says the display of election signs must, I recommend we put the words on public land, just so we are quite clearly stating it should just be on public land, that this is about on public land. And then where it talks about location and placement, you've got have no more than 2 election signs per candidate within a 100-metre radius when measured from any sign at a particular time. And I'm conscious that sometimes an owner of a private property might be erecting a sign on their private property without sometimes the knowledge of the candidate, and not because the candidates asked them, but because they just want to participate in the campaign. And I wondered if we could include in that where it says when measured from any sign, just adjust it to say when measured from any other sign on public land. Just so if a person wants to put a sign up of any sort, then we're only really measuring from public land. And I think that defines our 100-metre radius. And we're not actually interested in private land. If you're on private land, you can do basically whatever you want within reason. But we're only really monitoring public land on these signs. And then it's...
No, there's an existing local law about signs.
Yeah, but I understand what Councillor Toes is coming at, Ainsley. I'm seeing you nodding your head.
It's just clarification.
What I'm trying to avoid is that Mrs. Smith decides she likes Councillor Tozer, puts a sign up in her front yard, finds it somewhere, or however, there's thousands of signs out there over the last 12 years, puts one up, and then it precludes me from having a sign on the street within 100 metres. And
Ainsley's made the point that that's not the intent, and
I get that.
We'll amend the words.
I think by clarifying that wording, we'll tidy that up. Also, this document, this attachment 2, is there anything preventing us from sending this to any nominated candidate?
Through the Chair, once the local law is gazetted, this will support that local law amendment, and when that occurs, we would be actually providing that to candidates as part of our process.
Okay, so when we do it, then I would encourage the bullet points to be numbered, just for the sake of clarity. So if we are actually taking some sort of action, we can say clause like number the policy, number the guidelines, just so it can be really clearly made obvious to someone when they have deviated from the guidelines.
Thank you. Yeah, that's
paragraphs with sub 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A, 2B, 2C. I think that would be a better way to draft that document.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion. Thanks, Councillor.
Okay, if we can bring the recommendation back up, please. So let's get to the proposed change recommendation, the addition of 3, noting there's a bit of conversation around that if it's a resourcing problem in budget time, that this may not, the time frame specified in here may be a problem. Can I get some input from officers that if you're understanding the intent Councillor Doran is seeking, are you happy with it as is? That, if in the next couple of years you think that extra resourcing was needed, you'd request that the budget cycle out and that what Councillor Doran is seeking can be left as is? Or would you like the words amended to allow that opportunity?
Thank you, Chair. I think the wording is fine, noting that by the time this goes through the local lawmaking process, it won't be in place until the next local government election. So we've got plenty of time for Luke to do an assessment of resourcing requirements before then. He's very excited about it, I see. So I think the change recommendation as it stands provides us with the scope we need to do that assessment.
Okay, so questions on the recommendation. Councillor Gates and Councillor Curtis.
Sorry, my first question relates to resourcing, because isn't it correct that we are presently training all local law officers so that they can interchange between their various responsibilities, and that, excuse me, perhaps an animal control manager may be able to issue an infringement notice for a breach of election signage policy. So maybe by then we can ease off on the other stuff for that specific period of the election and use the officers as necessary.
Through the chair, that's correct, Councillor. So we're currently trialling a common compliance officer or a compliance ranger. That's currently within the trial phase. So we're testing two different models with that, but the intent is to look at a single officer that can look at multiple disciplines and having different models for that. So that could contribute to that particular strategy in the future.
Councillor Curtis first, and then I'll come to Councillor Dora and then Councillor Patterson.
It's not a question. Will you accept commentary?
For questions now, then I'll go into debate. Councillor Dora, question. Or Councillor.
I was, thank you, Chair. I was just wanting to speak to the resourcing comments that have been made a couple of times.
So you can speak to it when we get to debate. Councillor Patterson, question.
Through you, Chair, I was just wondering if Councillor Doran would consider changing the word implementation to enforcement, because that's kind of really my understanding, the focus of what we're talking about.
I have no problem with that, Chair.
Cool. Okay, so we have a change recommendation moved by Councillor Doran. Do I have a seconder for the change recommendation? Councillor Peter Young is the seconder. Councillor Doran, to you to open debate.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to acknowledge Councillor Peter Young for suggesting and requiring this report be brought to Council in the first place. And the change recommendation that I'm suggesting here today is about the enforcement of these new rules. So what I'm fearful of is that sitting councillors abide by the rules and the time delay between an illegally placed sign that isn't in adherence with our new guidelines is left up for a long period of time, and I would define a long period of time in a 30-day election just prescribed as more than 24 hours, because it can have an unknown impact on the election in a tight election. And so my concern is that the work has been done, and I think it's very sensible and very reasonable, but if not adhered to equally by the candidates and not enforced by city officers, it could lead to an advantage to one candidate over the other. So this point 3, the change recommendation, is about having the city officers come back to us at a time that I feel is reasonable, between 3 and 6 months out from the next local government election, to say how we're prepared, Mr. Chair, to enforce these measures and how we've done that homework after installing the local law, and how we're prepared to enforce these measures so that there's no unfair advantage on either party. I think that's reasonable. I think the changes will be welcomed by the community, especially those that maybe have a certain location close to the home that gets a lot of signs. And I do recommend to councillors to support the change, because I think that'll give us some certainty heading into the next election that there will be mechanisms in place to enforce them.
Councillors, before I open up for general comment, does anyone wish to speak formally against the change recommendation? So against, Councillor Curtis?
Yes, Chair, and noting I'm not a voting member, I just want to highlight that I'm really uncomfortable with the wording of point 3. We're making a decision that impacts everyone on the political spectrum, and I think it's a little self-serving to have wording that is basically we're only really interested in mitigating those concerns for ourselves. I know that it wouldn't be possible to bring something back before the federal election, and then the next scheduled one isn't until the local, but there could be by-elections, there could be referendums between that time, and to hold off on it being returned just for the sake of the impacts on us as candidates or on future candidates is a concern to me. I think the optics of it make me uncomfortable, and I'd prefer it just be brought back whenever possible.
So I think it is a fair point. While this is what the recommendation says, it doesn't preclude officers from bringing the report back earlier if they're ready with it. I think Councillor Doran's intent of being very clear that there had to be a report in here, but it doesn't stop them from bringing a report back earlier if they wish to. That can be a change by next resolution of a committee to move that. Yeah. So it is too late to change now unless you're not a committee member, so you can't move a change recommendation on it or move an amendment. Councillor Doran.
Chair, I'm in your hands here about committee rules. Councillor Curtis made an excellent point. My intention around 3 to 6 months local government elections was not sort of self-serving. It was because the timing provided by the local law was that it wouldn't be provided for the federal election, and the next state election is after the next local government election. So that was the timing I chose. However, Councillor Curtis makes an excellent point around by-elections and so forth, and if there is the ability to be in place. So I'm in your hands, and if there's no way to change it, I'm quite happy to.
We're in debate, so we can't make an amendment during debate. I'm open to an amendment being presented at full council to it. So we'll move on this one today and we can do an amendment.
Point of order, you can accept an amendment
during live
debate. In fact,
debate.
that's the only time you can accept an amendment, once we're in your debate, because you can't amend a motion that hasn't been taken. So you can definitely accept an amendment. Just not trying to chair for you, but
accept an amended motion or accept an amendment to this recommendation.
So you can go through the amendment process during debate if a member of this committee proposes an amendment that omits that word. You're the chair. You can accept amendment. That's the only time we can actually accept an amended motion.
Yeah. Right. So thank you to Councillor Tozer for clarifying that for me. I thought we'd have to do a separate amended motion to it or foreshadow something else. But if that's the case,
no. What I'm talking about is the amendment process. Yep. So you can, sorry,
Councillor Gates.
I believe the mover, with the acceptance of the seconder, can amend his own motion.
Right. If that's the case, I thought it would need a whole new motion.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I
if the chair's acceptable, yeah.
If you're accepting of that, the mover of the motion
and the seconder,
can amend the motion.
Right. I'm happy to take it from Councillor Gates and Councillor Tozer and Councillor Young that to be the case. So in that case, is there some words? What words are we changing to make this move?
Not less than.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right to the bottom.
No, it's the other part.
Put a full stop after
no less
signing.
than 3 months. You need to take out the no more than 6 months.
Yeah, just put a full stop after signage.
All right, just put a full stop after.
Right. So this is Councillor Doran's recommendation. So Councillor Doran, what words are we getting rid of?
In order to satisfy the good point that Councillor Curtis made, if we remove no more than 6 months ahead of the next local government elections, and we just have it as no less than 3 months, that means it can come any time between council resolution and 3 months before the next local government election. Councillor Curtis?
No, I wouldn't.
It's just the optics I'm looking to protect. I know that the intent was never about it. I think it's just to remove it entirely shows that we're prepared to be considerate of everybody that's impacted.
Back to Councillor Doran, it's your motion. So are you happy with that?
My concern is that we don't get something before the local government election.
Right. Then in that case, I'd suggest you leave it as is. Councillor Young, where's your thoughts at on this?
I would have been happy just to lose that whole thing after signage, but I can live with that. I think.
And now you see. So, Councillor Doran, it's your motion.
I'm happy to leave it as per the amended motion on the screen.
All right. Councillor Young, you still happy to second that as is?
Thanks, Chair.
All right. Now, I'm not going to reopen up opening backwards and forwards, but is there anyone looking to make a contribution to the now amended change recommendation? Councillor Tozer.
So my question is just in relation to the dialogue we had around fences. We haven't included that kind of ideological change to the resolution. Are the officers of the view that they're comfortable coming back with that report and addressing that issue about fences? Are we clear on it?
Through the Chair, we are comfortable in making those amendments to attachment 2. As per the recommendation, you can see that's included in there.
Yeah, great.
Yep.
Through you, Mr Chair, we can circulate that prior to full council next week too, if you'd like, or the week after.
That'd be good. Any councillor wishing to make a contribution for or against, or just general comment now? Councillor Young.
Just briefly, Chair, I'm very pleased with what the officers have brought forward, and I'm grateful to them for that. Mr Connery will remember that during the last council election, we had signs the size of that digital screen erected in public parks and alongside roads, and we could do nothing about it. I had numerous complaints, I'm sure others did, about signs on roundabouts, in all sorts of other public places that were really getting the ire of the local community, and I think we really have to have some regulation, and this will go a long way towards a good outcome. Thanks.
Anyone else wish to contribute? Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it brief, and I just wanted to add the extra comment to what you said earlier. I think there will be some really good outcomes from this, and of course, being my face along that particular stretch, I knew it. I got a lot of people feeding back to us at that time, so I think the changes coming forward today are really sensible. I'm sure everyone will miss my ginger head sitting on that particular fence, but at the same token, I think this is really sensible. 2 signs in a particular location, to me, is just, again, a positive way forward, and yeah, I look forward to supporting this when it gets to full council, given I'm not a voting member today.
So I just wanted to add to the end of that it's probably picking up on Councillor Gates and Councillor Patterson's point a little bit, that I think we're about to go through a big shift from where we currently are to this, and that possibly it may be in the next term after we've actually let it run through once, that possibly, you know, tightening it up even further. But I think from where we currently are to this proposal as it is a really good step forward, and we'll be supporting it. Councillor Doran, wish to close? Close.
Thank you, Chair. So I think intention is important, and I know the intentions of every candidate is to seek publicity. This provides some really great guidelines that are enforceable, that can protect the local amenity, but also not allow a competitive advantage to any one candidate, be they sitting or not sitting councillors. I think I welcome, again, Councillor Young's intention to bring this forward, and I think the committee does welcome it. I welcome Councillor Curtis's intervention there, so that if there is an election after the local law process is undertaken and these changes are ratified, that these improvements can be implemented ahead of the next local government elections. And I just reiterate that the local government elections was chosen simply because it is the next fixed date after the proposed changes are implemented under local law process. I thank council officers for their work on this difficult subject for councillors, and I think that the outcomes that we've arrived at here today through meaningful discussion are good, and I recommend them.
Councillors, debate is closed. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried unanimous. AZ Luke team, thank you very much. Councillors, that moves us along to item 6.8, Gaven North Investigation Area Progress Update. We welcome our strategic planning section back into chambers. So, councillors, we have 3 items and a few GBIs to get through, and we've got an hour available. As these investigation areas are very site-specific and divisional-specific, I'm hoping to take some of them as read, unless divisional councillors have got specific questions or changes to make. So I know Councillor Young, Gaven, with this one you had a proposed change. Did you need a presentation or happy to go straight to your change?
No, I don't need a
Yep.
presentation.
Right, so Councillor Young's changed recommendation is now up on the screen with his additional part in red, which is run past officers before the meeting today. Is there any questions from councillors on this item before we go to the change recommendation? In that case, I'll take Councillor Young as the mover of the change recommendation. I'm happy to second that change recommendation. Councillor Young to open.
Thanks, Chair. Just very briefly, thank you. It's obvious from the report that there's been a good body of work looking at environmental constraints and bushfire hazard, transportation improvements and so forth. And I think that it's important that we don't lose sight of all of that information and just have these documents sitting on a shelf. So my proposal here is that the material is distributed through the different departments as appropriate, and then it can be incorporated into existing strategies. So it's not saying start something fresh or new. It's saying here's a body of information that might inform the work that you're doing about environmental protection or crossing points on roads for koalas or whatever it may be. So I think it's a worthwhile inclusion. Thanks, Jim.
A question, Councillor Gates?
Yeah, I have a question through you to the acting CEO, if I may. I don't quite understand the part that says implementation within existing strategies and whether that is a burden on your staff given the work that has to be done around the LGMS and the planning scheme. And if it's put on hold, I don't understand why the implementation of strategies that have resulted from community consultation would be considered. We don't know what they are, so it's hard for me to support something I know nothing about.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it might be one, Councillor Gates, that Councillor Peter Young's better off to answer, but I can try it from my side. Councillor Young, I took that as we've got transport strategies, we've got a number of different internal network owners that you would want to ensure that we were all going off in the same direction. Is that the intent of what you're proposing?
So there are some specific outcomes identified, let's say, through the environmental assessment. They're listed on page 612 in regard to the Gaven North investigation area, and they just identify opportunities for us to improve our environmental protection in strategies that already exist. I'm just saying, just load this information into that work. It's not creating a whole body of new work. It's saying we're already looking at fauna crossings. Well, can this information inform the work that we're doing about fauna crossings?
So, Councillor Young, you're interested that the data that's presented in this be used by departments when informing policy. So if the environmental section of council is going to be doing a update on a particular policy, here's some live, up-to-date data they should be using as part of all the other evidence they collect.
Exactly, Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, Councillor Gates.
If I could just suggest we add the word possible before implementation, because I haven't explored this carefully. I don't know what we're asking the officers to potentially implement in strategies.
That's accepted by the mover and accepted by the seconder.
Thanks, Peter.
So anyone wishing to speak against the proposed change recommendation? Councillor Young, do you wish to close it all?
I just want to note that some people in the community would be pretty upset that we're kind of stalling this work because they've been waiting for a very long time. I first undertook a survey in the Gaven North area of people's desire to develop or keep things as they are more than a decade ago. And there was a 50% split then, exactly. I'm not sure what the current stats might be, but there's certainly a body of interest in progressing some change in this particular area. It's sandwiched between the motorway and a big suburb like Pacific Pines. It's just an old residual kind of development that's kind of irrelevant now, and it's got a lot of constraints. But I think there's been good work here, and that's why I suggest that we try to accommodate that work in the other strategic work that we're doing across the city. Thanks, Jim.
Debate is closed. We'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. 6.9, Oxenford investigation area. Councillor Fowler, I think you had some questions in regards to this one.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I think you can see the body of work that's gone into this. It's considerable. This report was the first time that I'd actually seen the transport plans and the management plan, active transport and also public transport. So it was really good to see the body of work that's gone in. Similarly, Oxenford residents have been waiting 6 years and this is majority do support this proceeding, Riversdale Precinct Day, and I have a similar view. I guess the question I have is just around the traffic and transport management plan and all of the details. I make note a lot around Oxenford is state-controlled roads. We have exit 57, which is congestion and at capacity, and a lot of the changes that we are suggesting is along Tamborine-Oxenford Road, which is a state-controlled road. So I'm just questioning what consultation has happened with Department TMR and also TransLink for public transport as well.
Through the chair, I might just get Brett to come and answer the question. He's around. Brett Bass from our transport. No, he should be here.
Brett's not there. Councillor Fowler, I think. Sorry, we're just trying to see if Brett's in the other room.
I'm going to try to answer the question. Yeah. So, through the chair, it's my understanding that DTMR and our transport team has an ongoing meeting to discuss future upgrades in the area. And my understanding is that the focus is on the M1 upgrades and the Kummer connector at this stage. I'll just got Brett here. If you can. Yeah.
Through the chair, we have had a number of discussions with Department of Main Roads regarding upgrades along that road. The indications that we've got is that they've got their hands full with a lot of other projects in southeast Queensland, particularly on the Gold Coast. And they're upgrading the M1, they're upgrading or they're building the Kummer connector. So the impression we got is that once they finalise a number of major projects, they'll be able to focus on some of the more minor roads, but currently they don't have any plans to upgrade this road.
So I think, Brett, if you wouldn't mind, Councillor said, it wasn't so much about timing, it was that were they consulted and do they agree that footpath additions as part of the active travel network would be included? That we're not going to put a vision out there saying there's going to be footpaths along this road, and when they do get to building it, they don't build footpaths.
Sorry, Chair, can I add to that? So what we're talking about is the signalisation has just gone into Michigan Drive, which is working really great. We've got provisions in this plan along that road for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 additional upgrades of intersections. Regardless of all the footpaths and all the other elements, my question is, have we presented this plan to TMR, and do they endorse this plan moving forward, being it is a state-controlled road? As the local councillor, Oxenford Investigation Area is supported in line with this future transportation network, which I do think is undercooked in some places. But I'm just asking the question, has the consultation happened? Has the planning team sat down with TMR and gone through this plan, that this is what is required if we do move forward with the Oxenford Investigation Area?
Through the chair, yes, we have. And a lot of the intersection upgrades, because the intersections with the main roads and with council roads, they can be undertaken by council. So some of those will be undertaken by council, even though they're on the main road. They're essentially also a council works project. So where we've got proposals to upgrade intersections, we do liaise with main roads. We have powers to undertake works on their road and vice versa. So we have discussed a number of projects with them, and we have passed this project by them, and they do support it.
Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't want to sound not supportive of this project. I am supportive of this project. I'm just really wanting clarity that what is being proposed is as a combined collaborative approach with TMR and the city as to this is what the plan is for future upgrades in line with this. We're in a really privileged position that we have 2 local councillors who actually live in Oxenford, and we drive these streets every day, Councillor Young and myself, and I think just really wanting that clarity. And secondly to that, the part that I feel is perhaps undercooked is the Michigan Drive and Cops Road roundabout. I know that we're talking about dual lane, but without consideration to duplicating the bridge down Entertainment Drive and the upgrade of that road. I think Councillor Young might be able to have some views on that as well. I think that that's paramount in line with this investigation area proceeding.
Councillor Fowler,
well.
I'm going to take this as leading into debate. So unless you can frame a very clear question to Brett, I might let Brett move on and we'll get on with it.
That's fine. Thank you, Chair.
But Brett, I think as a takeaway from this, a further briefing with Councillor Fowler to provide that clarity of what consultation has happened with the state and some clear stuff around the planning would be a good thing. Councillor Young, did you have a question on this item?
Yes, Chairman. And I'll just declare that I live in Oxenford, but my property is not within the investigation area, nor is it within the mapped areas on the maps that we've been provided. And I do use the roads, as Councillor Fowler said, and one in particular I use is that Cops Road and Michigan Drive roundabout, which is congested a lot with traffic entering from the north and from the south. And there's a single lane bridge that goes to Entertainment Drive. From there, it's I think that's a state-controlled service road. And then there's an intersection with the exit of Movie World. It's always congested there, and then there's a further intersection with... So,
Councillor Young, I do apologise just to be consistent. Have you got a question for officers, or will we leave this for debate?
So the question is, given that there's no identification of the need to duplicate the bridge close to that roundabout, are officers able to convince me that they are confident that these traffic arrangements are going to meet the needs of an increase in population of 7 times the existing population?
Through the Chair, there were some consultants engaged in relation to this study, and there were analyses done to show what road upgrades would be needed. Those are fairly high level. We have a LGIP program for major roads that last 20 years, and as projects approach the commencement date, we undertake further detailed investigation. So at the level of work that has been undertaken, we're convinced that the additional uplift can be satisfied or can be serviced by the road network. However, as I said, as planning and detailed design gets closer, we will undertake further work to ensure that it does meet the needs.
Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question just around the footpath that we've got identified. So it says Tamborine Oxenford Road provides shared path one side and footpath one side between Leo Graham Way and Michigan Drive. Is that meant to say Tamborine Oxenford Road? Because Michigan Drive is on the other side of the investigation area, and the main priority one footpath for Oxenford is that missing link down Tamborine Oxenford Road, which, if you change that word, would make sense to that. No, I'm asking the question, are you meaning the footpath along Tamborine Oxenford Road, or are you meaning a connecting footpath from Tamborine Oxenford Road all the way over the other side of the investigation area to Michigan?
What page are you referring to?
Just page 834 on the actual map. You can see.
Which dot point?
So not the dot point on the actual map. So you know how we have the blue outlined Tamborine Oxenford Road, then we have a blue outlined box describing that project.
Yeah.
So it says Tamborine Oxenford Road provides shared path one side and footpath one side between Leo Graham Way and Michigan Drive. Is that meant to say Tamborine Oxenford Road, and we're meaning the priority one footpath?
It should be Tamborine Oxenford Road.
Thank
yes.
you. Correct. I just wanted to get that clarity. One further question, and then I'm done. So when we're moving forward, and the endorsement today is about Riversdale Precinct Day. Can I just ask one question about Riversdale Precinct B? So if we are moving to community consultation, what does that look like in terms of timelines?
Through the Chair, so the Riversdale B precinct, we've been undertaking some high-level technical studies for the entire investigation area, and precinct B has been included in these investigations. So in terms of the next steps, we are looking at developing a draft concept plan and further detailed technical studies will be required to help us to inform this draft concept plan. And once that is completed, we'll be looking at engaging the Oxenford investigation community again. There could be a online survey, and there could be similar what we've done for Precinct A, which is meet the planner sessions, and there will be letter job sales as well.
So just on that consultation, when we're going to consultation, are you just going to be speaking to the residents in Riversdale Precinct B?
Through the chair, we believe that it would be sensible to engage the entire investigation area, and given that there might be people just moving to the area and they're not aware of this investigation, and I think that's the approach we'll be taking.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Fowler and Councillor Young, would you be open to that before full council, the three of us have a separate briefing with officers to better understand exactly what work has gone into the consultation with DTMR and where that all sits?
That'd be very welcome. Thanks, Chairman. Thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. If we can have that as an action from today, please, officers. So if there's no other questions, we'll move to the recommendation. There is no other questions. Do I have a mover for the recommendation? Councillor Fowler, a seconder. Councillor Doran jumped his hand in first. Councillor Fowler, would you like to open debate?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say on behalf of the residents of Oxenford, they've been waiting a long time for this work to be done, and thank you very much to city officers for all the technical studies that have been done this year. I know it's been very comprehensive and extensive. I'm excited that we are at the next stage, just really wanting to echo the main concern of residents who are in support or not support is the transportation plan and the traffic management, and that we're very aware and having a conscious look at the fact that it is state-controlled roads and a state exit 57 that this will impact the network. We're talking about 600 residents, going to potentially 4,000. So I think it's not insignificant. It's a huge, huge change for the community. So I'm excited that we're at this stage. I know the residents have been waiting a long time, and looking forward to really getting more detail on what that consultation with TMR has been. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to contribute? In that case, Councillor Fowler, can I take that as your close as well? Debate is closed. All those in favour of the recommendation? Against? Councillor Young, would you like your name recorded? Motion is carried. Takes us to 6.10, Highland Park Investigation Area.
And I'll just jump in and move the same change to the officer's recommendation with the inclusion of Councillor Gates' word possible in implementation. So for the very same reasons, for example, there's a list on page 853 of environmental considerations, and that's the sort of thing I imagine can go forward and can be implemented or considered for implementation. So I'm happy to move that, Chair.
Any questions for officers on this before I seek a seconder? That being the case, Councillor Young has moved the recommendation, the change recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gates. Councillor Young, do you need to add anything more to what you just said?
No, thanks, Chair.
Did you have a... No, I was going to say Councillor Patterson want to jump in. So I would like to add one thing quickly. This is a general part to all these investigation areas. I hate these damn things. They have dragged on way too long. Like, I think we've had today 6 and 7 years mentioned. I have to admit I'm a little bit concerned that we're talking about more rounds of community consultation on stuff that we've consulted on and consulted on and consulted on. So progressing these investigation areas to a conclusion needs to happen sooner rather than later, and the outcomes of the LGMS informing some of these investigation areas moving forward as part of the new planning scheme, or just not moving forward finally, because these things have just have taken far too long. They have stressed the community out. I get quite a lot of correspondence from members in these areas just confused and frustrated with how long it has taken. And the sooner that they can be done with and we can direct resources to other parts of the new planning scheme, the better. Councillor Young, do you need to close it all?
Look, you've addressed the planning part, and that's very difficult, but the actual implementation will be even more difficult, like just tortuous.
Can I give you a real life?
If you can make it a
Let's do it quickly.
30-second example.
Courtney Drive, I mean, became part of the 2016 scheme, and the first dwellings are just now and under construction, and everyone is still confused. Anyway.
Okay, debate is closed. Take the vote. All those in favour of change recommendation? Against? The motion is carried. Officers, thank you very much. Councillors, that takes us to general business items. The first general business item is one from Councillor Doran, which is now up on the screen. I'll give everyone a moment to have a quick read of it. Councillor Doran, your recommendation. I have Councillor Patterson as a seconder. Is there any questions on the recommendation on the GBI to put through to the councillor before I let him speak to it? In that case, Councillor Doran, would you like to open debate?
Thank you, Chair. So this general business item seeks to reaffirm Council's earlier decision in relation to the development known as Breakwater. Previous council to this one endorsed a 1,500 dwelling project on a floodplain with requiring significant civil works to undertake the project in a responsible way. The level of detailed consideration given to this project was immense, and those who sat in this chamber last council will know that my predecessor had a very good look at this particular development. And we got a lot of good community important wins, such as the public boardwalk was accessible to everybody. Lighting was to a standard that was safe and council standard. We had public toilets that are available so that the public again could access this 1,500 dwelling project. But we also importantly, and these small things are important to the city, we also made it that the man-made lakes that were created by this development were not dedicated back to the city for our cost burden and our maintenance. It was to stay with the overarching body corporate or bodies corporate, depending on their structure. Unfortunately, prior to the last election, Minister Scanlon, via the new state development framework, changed the approval to 2,750 dwellings. That's an 83% increase with no further consideration provided to us or detail provided to us, being the local councillor and the council, as to how we will manage that 83% increase on what was already a very, very big 1,500 dwelling development. The impacts are unknown because, as I'm aware, there's been no consultation with us. Now, what we have in Robina is a significant infrastructure problem, specifically around sewerage and around transportation infrastructure. The Robina State High School is at 94% capacity. Our hospital there is at capacity. Our rail station right there at Robina is full at 6:30 in the morning, and this increase places a great strain on a community where there's no additional infrastructure provided to show us how we will manage the growth. I want to make it very clear that Robina does, and my division, Division 11, does not say no to growth. We have a medium density attitude for Robina, and we do our share of heavy lifting in the city in relation to density, given that we don't have east-west connections and we only have a rail that goes essentially one way. This GBI affirms the city's position. It is our first opportunity to do so. It was a carefully considered, appropriately calibrated, a large enough development that allows the proponent to make a profit. I'm hoping that my position here, that the original 1,500 dwelling approval becomes council's stated position, and that without the millions required of state funding to improve our infrastructure to cope with this increased population, we can't satisfy this change. There is still time for the state to change their mind, and I'm hopeful that this letter from the Mayor affirming our position does give them time to change their mind and revert back to the original 1,500 dwelling approval. And with that, Chair, that's the intent behind this general business item. I'm hopeful that councillors will support me in this initiative.
Yeah. Councillors, is there anyone question?
Yeah, just for my knowledge. So this is not a TLPR. This is a state. Can I just clarify? This is state assisted development.
Yeah. So a state development framework, and the EGM director might pop in and help me out if I get off topic or lead me astray. It's a new law passed in July, is my understanding, and its intent is to unlock land that councils haven't or are hesitant to unlock with proponents. The issue here, Councillor Martin, is that this was already an active 1,500 dwelling approval. There wasn't a request to council to increase it, and so there wasn't any obstinance from council to block it. And so this use, whilst I respect the former minister and the desire to increase housing, this to me felt a lot like, as the local councillor chair, felt a lot like a decision for a press release timed for the upcoming election.
So I think the important part, and what I like about Councillor Doran's GBI, is that it's calling for the evidence. So, it's one thing to come out and say you're going to increase dwellings. Where is the evidence of all infrastructure networks? Where is the evidence that the concerns of the original approval of 1,500 dwellings with the sewer network, show us the evidence that the applicant has come up with to convince you to agree to this increase. Show us all of that. And then Councillor Doran's very important point. We know we have an infrastructure problem in Robina. It's well documented. It's an infrastructure problem that is going to get worse with Olympic villages and other things coming to the area. And I'm really, really glad to hear, as divisional councillor, him making the point that he supports growth in there, but it's got to come with a check for infrastructure. They can't just keep jamming stuff in and not be prepared to do the heavy lifting with us. So very supportive of Councillor Doran's GBI. Anyone else wish to contribute on this one at all? In that case, Councillor Doran, would you like to close? We'll take the vote. All those in favour? The GBI is carried unanimous. Moving to our next general business item. This was Councillor Gates had this recommendation, and I will second it. Councillor Gates had this GBI, and I will second it. Councillor Gates, wish to speak to it at all?
Chair, it's self-explanatory. It's just a report to come to us, keeping us up to date with what's happening with appeals. Thank you.
Very, very supportive of this. This is information that you should all be aware of and get regular updates on. We'll take the vote. All those in favour? The GBI is carried. Moving to our third GBI. This one was one from Councillor Fowler. So Councillor Fowler is to move. Councillor Doran wishes to second. Councillor Fowler, you wish to open?
Thank you, Chair. This is just we are next year having a community benefit development policy review, and this is just a GB to ensure that we do have some thought into sport clubs and recreational clubs. So basically, the objective here is to look at those sporting and recreational clubs who we are charging development infrastructure charges to, particularly our not-for-profit clubs who are community, maybe they are on our land. So essentially, we're wanting our sporting clubs to go and enhance their club facilities, and then as a city, we're then charging them development infrastructure charges for assets that we essentially own. So I'm keen to explore a change to that.
Hey, Councillor Gates?
They currently get a 50% discount, don't they, on infrastructure charges?
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Gates, if they do meet the criteria, they do.
Yeah. You want more?
So this will be considered as part of that policy review that was already coming through. Councillors, any other contributions on this GBI? Noting it's just a GBI, it'll be form part of a future report to consider.
The information will ultimately probably help inform some of the leasing framework that Mark Ensor's doing as well. So not to say that they will conversation.
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Toes, absolutely. So that we've already spoken about that internally.
Okay. If there's no other contributions, Councillor Fowler, do you wish to close it all? Happy to leave it as that. In that case, we'll take the vote on this GBI. All those in favour? Against? The GBI is carried. Councillors, that was all the GBIs that I was made aware of. Is there any other GBIs to be considered? That being the case that there's zero. Before we close the meeting officially, there's just a few end-of-year things to wrap up. So just for the knowledge of councillors, you might have realised that Catherine Rollo wasn't with us today. Catherine has accepted a new role over in the environmental part of council. So Trina will be acting in her position for the short term, and we wish best of luck to Catherine over in her new role and thank her for her contribution as acting GM of Strategic. Yeah, and Councillor Tozer looks forward to a strong relationship with Catherine. A couple other things. So it would be remiss of me not to make the point that our EGM is having a birthday very soon. I'm not going to mention age, but if we could just, in our own time, wish Alicia a happy birthday. That was terrible. Okay, and just to finish, so while we're still a few weeks out from Christmas, this will be our last planning committee for the year. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a wrap up. First of all, it was to give a massive thank you to the support staff. There's been a lot of system changes, a lot of personnel changes, a lot of tech changes this year. So to the support staff, sincerely, thank you. This just does not happen without all of you. To all the officers in the planning and regulation area, so in DA, strategic, regulation, this is the first section of a new term of council with the new organisation. I'm very confident that you can see through the quality of the reports coming through from all sections of council and some of the policy work that especially is coming through from the regulation area that we've got just a great group of officers in that place who are doing some great work. So to all the officers across all the sections of planning and regulation, a very Merry Christmas to you and your families. To our EGM, Alicia Swain, and our general managers, again, we are blessed in this organisation to have an incredibly professional and well-resourced planning area, and that is led by an incredibly competent EGM instead of GMs. Again, new organisation, a lot of things moving, new structure, and just to see the work coming through. If I could especially call out Luke Connery and Ainsley, I think the roles that you two were given in the organisational restructure were huge undertakings to be given, and the level of confidence I have in both of you, just know it's extremely high. To Mick Moran, as always, and to Roger Sharp and Lara, we are just beyond blessed in our DA section that we can have such confidence in all of you. So to the EGM, to the GMs and the managers, a very Merry Christmas to you and your families as well. Finally, to the committee members, so a new term of council and new committees. It was always going to be interesting to see how having so many new councillors on planning committee was going to go. We also increased our numbers this year, which was going to be interesting too. I wanted to say I'm beyond pleased with how the committee is going, that I think the level of questions and debate around DAs has been excellent. I'm really excited by the level of interest that all councillors, not just committee members, but especially committee members, are taking in the new planning scheme. Plenty of you got out and amongst the LGMS stuff. You're getting involved early, which is going to be critical. And that was where I was going to finish, was that while this has been a very big year, to forewarn you that it's going to be nothing compared to what the next couple of years will look like with this new planning scheme, and that if you could continue to bring the same energy and interest in it, would be wonderful. But to all committee members, thank you for your efforts this year, and on behalf of the committee and the organisation, Merry Christmas to you and your families as well. Madam EGM, did you wish to contribute at all?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to reiterate what you said and thank councillors, but thank our team too. I think it's well known that the planning agenda causes a lot of grief across the organisation, and I just want to sort of talk again to our chamber support ladies. There's been numerous occasions this year where it's been 8, 9 o'clock at night. Anya and Jodie have been the ones answering the calls, public holidays. You guys take the call, we appreciate it so much, and it's always in a really positive, let's just get this fixed. So we try our absolute best to have less corruption in the documents that we send through, and it still happens. I think it's just because of the volume of pictures and perspectives we have in the planning report. So just a big thank you from our team to the ladies, and then also my office as well, Lucy and Julie, who are in the background running around. So thank you to everyone. It's been a big year, but I think we're quite proud with what we've done, particularly with the restructure, and a particular thank you to Jodie and Anya as well, because there's been numerous occasions, and Jodie won't want me saying this, but it's been 9 o'clock at night where I've been texting her going, I'm desperate, can you help? And these ladies have come in the office at that time. So thank you.
The councillors close the meeting at 12:28.